In today's video, I wanted to begin my adventure through House Redoran's questline featured in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind. House Redoran is one of the 3 playable great houses in the game. For the main questline, when the Nerano is trying to achieve Hordator status, the player gets to interact with all 3 of the houses and learns a bit more about them. It's clear that House Redoran holds more traditional values. They answer to strength, honor, and duty. Combat prowess and the ability to fight are held to a high regard within the house. The book, Great Houses of Morrowind, gives this description for the faction. House Redoran prizes the virtues of duty, gravity, and piety. Duty is to one's own honor and to one's family and clan. Gravity is the essential seriousness of life. Life is hard, and events must be judged, endured, and reflected upon with due care and earnestness. Piety is respect for the gods and the virtues they represent. A light, careless life is not worth living. For this storyline, I wanted to play through each quest and detail the story. I'll also share my own experiences, opinions, and findings along the way. House Redoran offers a lot of quests. Some of them are very simple, and others are quite complex. By the end of it, the Nerano will have realized their full potential as a warrior. They'll have risen the ranks of House Redoran and proved themselves as a mighty addition. Along the way, they'll have also played the game of politics, making enemies out of other houses and ones within Redoran. Without further ado, let's dive into the story. I began my adventure by seeking out members of the Great House. You don't have to look far or hard to get wind of these factions. Most of the Dunmer on Vvardenfell are eager to share their allegiance. Plus, depending on which city or town you're in, the guards will be marked as protectors for one of the great houses. As for House Redoran, a majority of its high-ranking members are based out of Uldrune. They live in a spot called Underscar in the Manor district of the city. Underscar is the shell of an emperor crab, and it's practically the jewel of Uldrune. Once inside, I wandered to the opposite end of the chamber and located the Redoran Council entrance. Heading on in, the entranceway was mostly filled with guards, but there was one unique NPC. She was a red guard named Naminda. Speaking with her, she introduces herself as the drill master and recruiter for the house. Naminda was also quick on the draw with offering me a spot in the Great House. Inquiring about it, she welcomes my character with open arms, but gives me a word of warning. Once I've pledged my allegiance to House Redoran, I won't be able to join any of the others. Feeling good and ready to commit though, I made my oath to Redoran and became a hireling in the faction. Naminda informs me that I now have access to the house's trainers and that they will come in handy for helping me with mastering my skills. She also tells me to keep checking in for rank advancements, and lastly, when I'm ready, I can come to her for my first set of duties. Wasting no time, I immediately got to work. For my first task, Naminda informs me that someone named Drulene Phelan needs some help. There are hostile mudcrabs in the area that are causing her harm. Drulene Phelan's guar farm is west of town, and Naminda says that she can fill me in on more of the details. Before leaving, I cast Mark in the council entrance. This way, I can have easier access when returning to Naminda. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there are a lot of simple quests for Great House Redoran. For high-level characters, slaying some mudcrabs isn't anything to boast about. However, that's because these tasks are not meant for overpowered Nerano. Almost all factions have beginner, intermediate, and advanced missions. These quest lines were made so that low-level players can get their foot in the door early on and gradually complete the story as time goes on. But rest assured, as time does go on, the more experienced characters will get their spot in the limelight. For now though, think of these as introductory quests. After some time spent searching, I finally landed on Drulene's farm. There were several guar grazing in the fields, and the Dunmer herself was lingering close by. Chatting with her, she asks if Naminda sent me and if I was there to help her with the mudcrab problem. Telling her yes, she tells me that there are 2 of them hunting down her guar. The other day, they killed one of her creatures and dragged it off to who knows where. Drulene says that the crabs typically come from the southwest, which is where the coast is. She needs this problem taken care of ASAP, otherwise she'll be out of guar and forced to relocate. Exiting the conversation, I followed the map southwest until eventually I hit the coastline. In the swampy region of the West Gash, I spotted a dead guar not far from the shoreline. No doubt this was one of Phelan's animals. Getting in close, I could see the 2 mudcrabs lingering around the corpse. They aggroed onto me, and it was officially go time. Luckily though, these creatures are arguably the weakest enemy in all of Morrowind. They're only capable of dealing one damage point at a time, and a good slashing, cast, or well-placed arrow will wipe them out quickly. Once the crustaceans were eliminated, I returned to Drulene and informed her of the good news. She was ecstatic and relieved to hear that her farm was now safe. Before leaving, she notices that my character's a bit tired and offers me something called Hackalo. Accepting it out of curiosity, she gives me 2 samples of the Hackalo leaf. It turns out that it's an ingredient and can restore fatigue for 1 second. However, it also has the ability to paralyze, so I decided to just keep it in my inventory. Recalling to Aldrun, I checked in with Naminda and told her that I took care of the problem. She called it good work and told me to come back to her for more duties. A simple and humble beginning to my adventure through House Redoran's questline. With that, thus ends the quest, Mudcrab Pests. Chatting with Naminda again, I asked her for my next task. The Redguard told me that she needs someone to deliver a potion of cure disease. Asking more about it, the potion needs to go to someone named Thelden Virith at the village of Aldvalathi. She shares that Thelden doesn't really have a title with the house, and that he's just there to, quote, keep the peace. Before leaving, Naminda suggests that I check in with Thelden before returning to Aldrin. Aldvalathi is a fishing village north of Gnisis. Admittedly, I always forget that this place exists. I haven't done a lot of quests there, and anytime I do need to pop in, the matter is taken care of really quickly. Now, for this quest, it's more so meant to introduce the player to other quest givers for this faction. Maybe you could make the argument that the Cure Disease potion serves some importance too, but it's mostly to get the Nerevarene's feet wet and to show you what's available. It helps to get the player exploring and aids you in mapping out the world of Vardenfell. Plus, along the way, you get to hone your combat skills against some of Morrowind's beasts and nuisance creatures. Arriving in Aldvalathi, I began to ask around for Thelden. One of the guards told me that he was in the outpost, the building with the watchtower connected to it. Entering the space and looking around for a bit, I finally landed on Virith. Chatting with him, he introduces himself as the Hetman of Aldvalathi, so I guess he does have a title of sorts. Delivering the Cure Disease potion, he says that some clan called the Arvil family will be happy and asks if there's anything else he could do for me. This includes a set of duties that come directly from him. Personally, I like to keep my storylines as linear as possible, so before starting his set of missions, I'd prefer to wrap up all of Naminda's. Call it my gaming OCD brain. With that taken care of and Thelden officially on my radar, I recalled back to the council entrance. Speaking with Naminda, I informed her of my adventure and she congratulated me on my success. With that, thus ends the quest, Deliver Cure Disease Potion. Chatting again with Naminda, she gave me my next set of orders. Apparently, a Redoran trader named Mathis Dalobar has recently gone missing. He runs trade routes through Aldrun every month, and he has yet to report in. Naminda would like me to find Dalobar and ensure that he's safe. She suggests that I start my search in Margon, and that I move to Gnisis if things are going slow. Exiting Underscar, I took the Siltstrider to Margon and began asking around. Most folks were able to give me an answer, but it wasn't all that specific. Due to the town's proximity to Red Mountain, they get some particularly bad ash storms. Everyone seems to think that Mathis got caught up in the most recent one, and that led him to taking cover wherever he could find shelter. No one really has any ideas where said shelter would be though. That is, until I started asking around in the Andis trade house. An orc named Bugdarash Gregeshel thinks that she saw him take refuge in the Redas Tomb. On my way out, she tells me that the tomb is just west of town, right before the road veers south. Now, a bit of a spoiler here, but even though the player doesn't need to fully explore the dungeon, it does serve as your introduction to dungeon crawling and cave exploration. The quest lures the Nerevarene into the crypt, and from there, it's your choice for whether or not you'd like to look around it. Before I continue to get ahead of myself, I'll jump back to current events. Redas Tomb is found off of the main road, right before the player hits the NPC, Fonus Rathiran. Upon going inside, you'll spot a lone Dunmer in the entranceway. This is Mathis Dalobar, and he appears to be safe and sound. Speaking with him, he's extremely thankful that I came along and found him. He's been stuck in here for days. Originally, Dalobar came in here to get away from the ash storm. In fact, said ash storm took out his guar, so he considers himself lucky to be alive. However, once the door closed behind him, he couldn't get it back open, so that's why he hasn't left the site. He asks me if we can travel back to Margon together, and I agree. Mathis asks to be dropped off at the town's shrine, and from there, we make haste back to civilization. If you did choose to look around the tomb, you'd run into several undead and come across some minor loot. Low-level players might have issues here, while mid to high-level ones should find it relatively easy. Once Mathis is brought into Margon's shrine, he thanks me and the two of us go our separate ways. Recalling to the council entrance, I speak with Naminda and fill her in on the details. She's glad to hear of Dalobar's safe return and extends her gratitude. With that, thus ends the quest, find Mathis Dalobar. Chatting with Naminda once more, I asked her for my next set of duties. She told me that some Hlaano guards stole a Redas relic from the Uveran ancestral tomb. It's called a Founder's Helm, and that Hlaano lackey is now parading it around Balmora. Naminda would like me to go and retrieve this armor piece from the Hlaano member, Alvis Terry. I'm to get it back by whatever means necessary. However, I'm not to shame House Redas. Curious, I asked her what she meant by that. Really, the only stipulation is that I can't murder Terry, nor can I attack him unprovoked. Naminda is worried that this will bring on backlash from the rest of House Hlaano. I could do just about everything else though, and can slay him if he strikes first. Exiting the Manor district, I took a Silt Strider to Balmora and entered the 8 plates. Standing close to the bar was the target Dunmer. Every so often, Morrowind tests the player's confrontational skills, little speechcraft and disposition checks. Alvis wasn't playing nicely, nor was he in the negotiating mood. Weighing out my options, I thought, yeah, maybe this man needs a little kick in the rear. Obviously, this was going to lead to his death, but hey, I needed that helmet. Casting Frenzy, Terry went into an uproar and started swinging his blade around. Now, the Hlaano rogue is placed at level 9, dons bone mold armor, and wields a steel shortsword. For novice level players, this could be a tricky battle, so it's best to come prepared. For more advanced players though, it's just like any other 1v1. This also ends up being a great chance for newer characters to acquire some medium armor and perhaps a new sword. Once he's been defeated, you can search his inventory and take back the Founder's Helm. Alternatively, if you raise Terry's disposition high enough, he will begrudgingly hand it over. Regardless, once the whole ordeal was over with, I recalled to Aldrun and spoke with Naminda. She was glad to hear that I had recovered the Founder's Helm and that I didn't shame House Redas in the process. Handing it over, she thanked me for my efforts. With that, thus ends the quest, Founder's Helm. Checking in with the Redguard again, I asked for more work. Naminda informed me that Julian Phelan is having more problems at her farm. This time though, it's because of bandits. She explains that because Phelan's property is further from the city, it's more likely to be targeted by outlaws. Apparently, said criminals are typically outcast Ashlanders. Naminda suggests that I speak directly to Julian though for more information. Leaving Aldrun, I retraced my steps west and landed back at Phelan's Guar farm. Chatting with the Dunmer, she explains that her and some of the other herders in the area have been targeted by bandits. Said bandits are after her Guar. She's seen them come up from the south and have already stolen her best beast. Julian suggests checking south for any tombs, caves, or dungeons that they could be holed up in. Following her advice, I wandered downwards for a bit and saw some Guar on the horizon. They were domesticated, and that was a clue that the bandits were close by. Just behind the creatures was the Telvain ancestral tomb. Before, when the player had to locate Mathis Dalobar, dungeon exploration was optional. However, now it's part of the quest, and it could possibly be the player's first time plundering. The tomb itself is rather small, and in the first couple of rooms, I just faced off against a few rats. However, the final chamber is where I ran into the outlaws. Gabin is a level 3 Breton rogue, while Glom is a level 5 Wood Elf hunter. Gabin fought with an axe, while Glom wielded a short sword. As for the loot in the tomb, most of it is minor, but for beginner players, the weapons can be handy, the scroll can help out in a bind, gold is always nice, and in the end, everything can be sold for a bit of pocket change. Returning to Juline's property, I told her that the bandits would no longer be a threat. As a form of her gratitude, she offered more of those Hakolo leaves. While I wasn't interested in eating them, I thought that it couldn't hurt to just keep them on me. Recalling to the council entrance, I reported back to Naminda. She thanked me for my efforts and gave me a glimpse into my next task. Apparently, One of the council members has been threatened. With that, thus ends the quest, Trouble with Bandits. Following up with Naminda on her previous statement, she ended up hard blocking me and said that I needed to be a higher rank. That was something I had completely forgotten about. In Morrowind, you have to personally ask for an advancement. For most of the factions in future Elder Scrolls titles, advancements are given out at the beginning of each new task, so this was something I had to get used to. From Hireling, I jumped up to Retainer, then to Oathman, then to the required rank of Lawman. Rekindling the conversation, Naminda explains that Sarethi, one of House Redoran's counselors, believes that his life is in danger. He lives in Sarethi Manor, which is here in the Underscar. Naminda wants me to guard the counselor until more help arrives. Eventually, I was bound to meet with one of the higher-ups. In almost all of the questlines, the player gets tasks from and works with members who are in leadership roles. This is so that you can progress onwards to more important duties and can establish meaningful connections within each faction. Sarethi Manor is 2 doors down from the Redoran Council. Upon going inside, I laid eyes on 2 dead Redoran guards. Standing over them was Counselor Sarethi. Speaking with him, he's grateful that I arrived on time. Assassins killed his guards and he fears he's next. As he's telling me to stay alert, I hear yells and battle cries from behind. This is a pretty obvious tip-off that it's showtime. 2 assassins come running from the entranceway. Gragas Liren is level 9 and Arsen Salis is level 7. The 2 Dunmer have Netch armor and fight using steel tantos. Athen doesn't do anything to aid the Nervarine, so for the most part, you're on your own here. Again, if you're a lower level / newer player, it's best that you come prepared. Potions, scrolls, and a game plan. If you're in need of a gear upgrade, the dead Redoran guards might have some useful items on them. Once the 2 assassins were defeated, I spoke with Sarethi again. He thanked me for saving his life and said that he'll do what he can to return the favor. You'll notice that Athen has duties as a dialogue prompt, and again, that's because he's one of the faction's many quest givers. Repeating what I said before, I wanted to run through the Redoran storyline as linearly as possible, so Naminda's arc needs to be wrapped up before I move on. Returning to the council entrance and speaking with the Redguard, I informed her that Sarethi was safe. Naminda explains that her father and Athen were close friends. She feels a strong connection to the counselor, and therefore she's concerned about his well-being. Before exiting the conversation, she tells me that guard duty gets rewarded with septums. With 200 gold now in my pocket, that's the first time so far that House Redoran has actually paid me fairly. With that, thus ends the quest, Guard Sarethi Manor. Chatting with Naminda one more time and asking for duties, she says that that's a wrap on her end. If I want to progress further with House Redoran, I'm going to need to be sponsored by one of the council members. The Redguard suggests that I speak with all of them to see who'd actually be willing to do so. She also mentions that I should pay a visit to someone named Pharaoh Rethoran in Vivec City. And lastly, Naminda promotes me to the rank of Kinsman. At this point, I have a lot of options laid out for me. There are at least 3 more quest givers that I could approach for House Redoran. Plus, in terms of council sponsorship, I got off on the right foot with Athen Sarethi. He literally said that he owed me for saving his life. For now though, I'll put the thoughts of a sponsor in my back pocket and pay a visit to Thelden Virith. The old hetman of Aldvelothi was vying for my time pretty early on, so I figured might as well continue off the adventure with him. Rushing to the coastal village and entering the outpost, I moved my mark spell for more efficient travel. Approaching the Dunmer, I asked for duties and he immediately got into it. Thelden says that Aldvelothi is usually a quiet fishing town. However, as of late, Old Bluefin has returned to the docks and has continued to terrorize the fishermen. Virith explains that Old Bluefin is a slaughterfish. Every couple of years, the fish returns to Aldvelothi and wreaks havoc. It's got quite the reputation for itself, and Thelden hints that him and Blue have a history together. The hetman would like me to take care of the fish before it puts the local fishermen out of business. Exiting the outpost and running to the docks, I began my search for the creature. I actually enjoyed the premise of this quest. At this point in time, I hadn't actually played through any other quests that involve slaughterfish, so it's neat to see these deep-sea terrors getting more recognition. On that subject, it is a rather niche mission, and apart from an introduction to water mechanics and creatures, I don't think there's a teachable moment here for newer players. Eventually, after slaughtering my fair share of fish, I was finally able to locate Old Bluefin off of the shoreline and put an end to its terror. Returning to the outpost and reporting to Theldin, he asked if Big Blue was finally dead, and I told him yes. As a thank you from the fishermen in Nalvilie, they put together 10 samples of dreg wax and offered it up as a reward. With that, thus ends the quest, Old Bluefin. This next segment is what I like to call a 2-for-1. Chatting with Virith again, I asked him for more duties. Theldin told me that a disease shock had made its way into Ashimanu mine and that it needs to be taken out. The shulk has infected the local Kwama, their eggs, and the miners. Ashimanu mine had to close down for the time being. The dungeon's located a good distance southeast of Gnisis, and the Hetman gives me specific instructions on how to get there. Now, before I mention that this portion of the questline was a bit of a 2-for-1, that's because in Theldin's same message, he talked about a feral Kagouti attacking traders. Said beast is wandering the roads and trails by the Ashimanu mine. For this quest, the Dunmer says to just be wary of it. However, the Kagouti is actually the target for the very next mission. Well, I didn't know that at the time. I guess I got lucky in that I ended up running into it. Right where the road forks off to Gnisis and Aldrun, just before the egg mine, the Kagouti was patrolling the road. Kagoutis are relatively easy fights. This one in the West Gash region can deal 10 to 25 points of melee damage, but the battle is quite manageable. Given that these two quest subjects are so close together, it's best to knock them off in the same trip. Now, shortly after that tussle, I made it to the Ashimanu egg mine. Egg mines tend to come up a lot in these faction questlines. I've always felt like they add more to Morrowind's lore than they do to the in-game experience. The Kwama eggs are considered a delicacy among the Dunmer, and more often than not, they're relied on as food sources. While we don't see the brunt of it during this quest, a closed-off egg mine is detrimental to the surrounding villages and their economy. The Imperial Legion has a quest that showcases this perfectly. It definitely presents a clear picture as to what a closed-off mine really does to the local area. The first zone of Ashimanu mine mostly had me meandering through the tunnels and pushing past the Kwama workers. Soon though, I made it to the Queen's lair and fighting had officially begun. Some diseased Kwama came hopping in towards me. Luckily, they're no tougher than Vardenfell's rats and some good slashes did the trick. Just behind them, near a batch of Kwama eggs, was the diseased shulk. Shulks have the ability to unleash a firebite attack, so if your character has weaknesses to fire, it's best to play this one sort of safe. On the other hand, the giant beetles actually have weaknesses to frost, so if you have some sort of spell or enchantment, you should be in the clear. Otherwise, they're pretty simple creatures to beat, and once the shulk was defeated, I was ready to return to Nalvilie. Recalling to the outpost, I reported back to Theldin, and he called my efforts good work. Now, asking about my next set of orders, Virith talks about a Kagouti den and how they're attacking travelers along the Gnisis-Aldrun route. Further clarification led to him realizing that I had taken care of the problem. The lone Kagouti was apparently the pack leader, and Virith says that if there are any more issues out that way, he'd let me know. While the den does exist and the player could have cleared more Kagouti, this method allows for a faster approach to more meaningful stories. With that, thus wraps up the quests, Ashimanu Mine, and Kagouti Den. Who knows what adventures and plotlines lie ahead? Where will my character get led to next, and what sort of political tensions will he get drawn into? Resuming my duties, I checked in with Theldin again and asked for more work. The Hetman tells me that House Redaran was sent to the Telvanni base, Shishi, in order to take it over. However, that was some time ago, and no one's reported in to him since. Virith would like me to go over there and see what's going on. He gives me instructions on how to get to the base and who I'm supposed to get into contact with. Once I see that everything's under control, I'm to retrieve the Shishi Report from Barama Salis. This questline has already seen tension and drama with House Hlaano, so it's only natural that it starts to get into all that with House Telvanni. It's no secret that the three playable great houses aren't fond of one another. While they play the game of politics and act somewhat cordial in public, behind closed doors is a whole other scenario. Assassination attempts, turf wars, slander, theft. Sometimes it feels more like the Mafia than it does ancient, great, and noble houses of Morrowind. As per the instructions, I traveled to the town of Margon and began heading northwest. Not far into the Foyada Banadad, I came across an old Telvanni structure. No doubt, the wizarding base of Shishi. Heading on in, the scene was cause for concern. There were dead NPCs in all of the rooms. Because I'm the new guy in town, I had no clue whether these were Redaran folk or Telvanni wizards. Some of them were wearing robes, so that was a potential tip-off that they were Telvanni, but the mystery was quickly curbed when I walked into the main chamber. Standing at the center of the room was a guard named Anis Romoran. Anis was friendly and identified as a House Redoran member, meaning that House Redoran had won the fight. Relieved, I continued my search for Barama Salis and moved upstairs. Here, there were 2 more guards and a couple more dead bodies. Looking around, there's plenty of minor loot that the player can take. Again, if you're hurting for gold, the small items can add up. After having a look around the place, I saw that one of the guards was Salis. Sparking up a conversation, I asked about the Shishi Report. In a rather underwhelming manner, Barama simply handed it over. That was about it for the interaction. Reading the report, Salis detailed that 5 Redoran agents stormed Shishi and took out the 5 Telvanni wizards. It sounds as though 2 of the Redoran members perished in the battle, but the job was ultimately successful, and they're awaiting further orders. From here, it is acceptable to just return to Theldin. You have what you came for, and everything seems under control. However, there is a hidden segment for this quest that's pretty easy to miss. Standing next to Barama is another guard named Temis Romavel. Asking him about the Shishi Report, Temis believes that there's still 1 more Telvanni wizard hiding out. He sometimes hears strange noises in the room below. It's weird though, because the room underneath this one is the one with Anis in it. After spending a little too much time looking at Romarin sideways, I decided that he's probably not a Telvanni in disguise. So, returning to the main room and investigating further, really the only out-of-the-ordinary thing in the room was a random Breton skull. Curiously, I interacted with it. Instead of picking it up, the skull ended up turning, and I heard the sounds of stones moving around. Racing downstairs, the once walled-off back section was gone, and a trapdoor leading further down was revealed. Descending the ladder, I came face to face with the sole survivor of Shishi's Telvanni. Favis Andis is a level 17 Dark Elf sorcerer. He knows a whole slew of spells and can be a rather tricky opponent in these tight quarters. Recommended is to bring some form of magical resistance, spell absorption, or silence. Once he was defeated, I climbed back up the ladder and informed the guards. There's no celebration or anything fancy, but Salis says that I should tell Theldin of my kill, and Temis feels justified with his hunch. Recalling to Hlaano, I handed the report to Virith. As for the hidden Telvanni wizard, he just calls it good work, and says that maybe the wizards will think twice about returning to Shishi. In terms of outcomes, the extra job netted me a plus 15 disposition increase with Theldin, whereas turning back early would have resulted in only plus 5. With that, thus ends the quest, Shishi Report. Chatting with Virith again, I asked him for more work. This is where he tells me that Hlaano is relatively quiet. There aren't any more duties right now, and he suggests that I look to either Naminda or Pharaoh Retharan and Vivek. You'll notice that Theldin doesn't have any dialogue for advancements, so as of right now, one of the few people who can bump me up from Kinsman is Naminda. Even though he wasn't on the list of recommendations, Sarethi is located close to her, so I figured in the meantime, I might as well continue with his story arc. Traveling to Aldrun, I approached Naminda and asked for an advancement. However, this is where she says that only Sarethi could promote me to the rank of house cousin. At this point, it feels a little bit like fate. Heading to the Sarethi Manor, I sparked up a conversation with the councilman and asked for a promotion. Fortunately, he was willing to advance me to house cousin, but nothing more beyond that. Ready to get back into it, I asked him for more duties. Sarethi ended up dropping a hefty task in front of me. He said that he'd be willing to sponsor me if I helped his son with his predicament. Apparently, Varvur Sarethi is being held in the Archmaster's Manor. He's being accused of a crime which Athen believes he did not commit. The counselor would like me to free Varvur from Bolvin Venom's house and bring him back here. When asked about Varvur, Athen gives me directions to Venom Manor. He also says that Bolvin is holding him prisoner due to some sort of privileged private justice. When Varvur and I escape Venom's house, we'll apparently be in the clear and no one will follow us. Even though he didn't explicitly state it, that gets me guessing that as soon as his son's free, we're going to be followed and hunted down. When asked about Bolvin Venom, Athen still believes that he's a good leader. He's the example of what every Redoran should strive to be, a strong warrior with great leadership skills. Sarethi says the only issue though is that he doesn't have empathy or compassion. Exiting the conversation, it was officially go time on Varvur's rescue. Way back when I ran through Morrowind's main questline, I actually embarked on this very same quest. It was necessary to receive Athens sponsorship, as it was a step closer to becoming Hortator of the Great Houses. With that being said, I remember how it's supposed to go down. There isn't anything crazy or outlandish that gets spoiled, but if anything, it just saves time while searching. Heading into the Venom Manor, I began running through the estate. Admittedly, I did sort of forget where they were holding Varvur, so I guess running through it the first time didn't do all that much for me. Casting Charm on select NPCs also did absolutely nothing, as none of them were willing to give up Varvur's position. Eventually though, I made it to the right wing of the manor and located the necessary quest items. Lying on one of the nearby benches was a note to someone named Malsa Eulis, and a mysterious key. Reading the note, it makes mention that some, quote, special guest is locked away in a side room behind one of the tapestries. Eulis is instructed to guard the door at all costs. Unsurprisingly, taking the key is considered a crime. Malsa is hawking over the note, key, and door at all times. I personally found stealing the key to be a pretty tricky feat. Well, at the end of the day, I probably could have just unlocked the door via spell, or could have taken the key, freed Varvur, and paid off the fines. I wanted to do things by the book. Really, I just got fixated on stealing the key, because the game wasn't allowing me to do so in peace. So, I purchased a telekinesis spell, stood behind the staircase, fiddled with the cursor for 5 minutes, and finally took the key undetected. Again, a bit of a waste of time, but it felt like a personal accomplishment. Key in hand, I ran to the nearby tapestry and unlocked the secret door behind it. Inside was Varvur Sarethi. Speaking with him, he was surprised to see me and asked if I was sent by his father. Before telling him yes and traveling back together, I got his opinion on Bolvin Venom. Varvur believes that Venom was going to use him as a hostage in order to blackmail Athen. The young Sarethi suggests that I steer clear of Bolvin at all costs. Wasting no more time, I told him to stick close, and together, we began our escape from Venom Manor. Every time we passed by a guard, they'd aggro onto us. Well, more specifically, me, which was a good thing, as now, Varvur's only job was to follow my character. Eventually, we booked it out of the estate and ended up back in Scar. Just as Athen had said, we weren't followed and none of the guards out here cared. Returning to Sarethi Manor, I brought Varvur to his father and received the journal update. Chatting with Athen, he expresses his gratitude towards his son's safe return. He says that he's once again indebted to me. He offers to sponsor me in House Redoran and promotes me to the rank of House Brother. With that, thus ends the quest, Rescue Varvur Sarethi. Now, I know that I'm standing in front of my new sponsor, but there's still a matter that needs to be taken care of. Before, Theoden Virith said that he didn't have any more work, but you see, that was a lie. He just needed someone of House Brother status to do the job. Well, I just got promoted, and he's got one more task for me, so I figured I might as well return to Ardvalothi and close out the Hetman storyline. Speaking with Virith, he says that he needs someone to defeat some cultists in the ruins of Ashimanu. Ashimanu is the Daedric ruin that's literally right beside the fishing village. It's practically connected to it. Once inside, I'm to locate a worshipper named Gordol and take him out. Sounds easy enough. Exiting the outpost, I traveled a brief distance east and began staking out Ashimanu. Both the exterior and the interior are guarded by several Daedra and cultists. No matter what level you are, these threats shouldn't be taken lightly. However, with that being said, something I haven't gone over yet in detail are the House Redoran ranks. In total, there are 9 of them, and House Brother is rank number 6. In order to advance through the faction, the player needs to keep up with their, quote, favored skills and attributes. These required attributes are strength and endurance, while the required skills are armor, athletics, heavy armor, long blade, medium armor, and spear. In order to reach the rank of House Brother, I needed my endurance and strength to each be at level 32, and of those favored skills, one of them needed to be at level 60, while 2 of the others needed to be at level 20. While beginners still fall under this category, I think it's safe to say that most newbies would have been phased out by now. Therefore, you probably knew what you were getting yourself into at Ashimanu. Back to the Daedric ruins, the dungeon has 2 zones. The first contains several worshippers. They're all Dark Elf casters and range from level 16 to level 17. Also, fun fact, this is where Molag Bal's Daedric Shrine is, hence the presence of cultists and Theoden's adamance that Gordol dies as soon as possible. Eventually, I hit the second zone, the Sunken Vaults. The vault is essentially one big chamber, and it's well beneath the ground. I guess the name is pretty appropriate. Making my way down to the bottom, I spotted a lone NPC, and he was looking right back at me. This was Gordol, and from there, the final fight had begun. Gordol is a level 20 Dunmer battle mage. He dons a set of ebony armor and fights using a Daedric war axe. On top of that, he knows a plethora of spells, but mostly casts conjuration and mysticism magic. For our fight, he relied heavily on conjuring a greater bonewalker. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know just how much I hate these enemies. Every hit drains the player's strength. Eventually, you'll get over-encumbered, your melee attacks will stop being effective, and your target will close in for the kill. Luckily, I was able to finish the job before Gordol could do anything crazy. Once he's defeated, the reward here is pretty special. A set of ebony armor, a Daedric war axe, and all of the minor loot that's found in his den. Once ready, I recalled to the Nalvilie outposts and reported my success. Theoden was ecstatic to hear about Gordol's death. As a reward for my efforts, and a bit of a farewell token, he gifted me the Ebony Spear. This weapon is of course an Ebony Spear, but it also has the enchantments of damage health by 10 points for 1 second, and drain agility by 10 points for 1 second as well. With that, thus ends the quest, Kill Gordol. Chatting with Theoden once more, he verified that that was officially the end of us working together. So, leaving Nalvilie for good, or until I need to come back for some odd quest, I traveled to Aldrune and made way into Sarethi Manor. Once here, I moved my mark spell and got into the next task with Athen. Sarethi says that while he's still grateful for the rescue of his son, he needs another favor. Varvur's been accused of murdering his best friend, Braelyn Carverin. Athen is in disbelief that his son would do such a thing, but the evidence is overwhelmingly stacked against him. The counselor suggests that I begin my investigation by speaking with Varvur. Exiting the conversation, I ran over to the guard quarters and poked my head in each room. On the fourth and final door, I located the young Sarethi and began speaking with him. Varvur opened up by saying that he isn't feeling that well, which is relevant to the story. When asked about Braelyn, he assures me that he didn't kill him. Apparently, the guards found Varvur near the body, but he doesn't remember much of what happened that night. Although, he does finish off by saying that sometimes he gets these bad dreams. When asked about said dreams, Varvur says that it's always the same one. He's actively killing Braelyn Carverin. He's unsure what they mean though, and is confused if said dreams are a reflection of reality. Apparently, the dream started before Braelyn's death, and right about when he received a mysterious ash statue. It's still in the room with him, and he wonders if removing it will cause the heinous dreams to stop. Right behind Varvur, on a small shelf, is this sinister, suspicious ash statue. Why anybody would display it is beyond me, but picking it up, I left the guard quarters and returned to Athen. Showing him the statue, he becomes unnerved. He asks me to deliver it to someone named Serano at the temple, as apparently he might know more about it. Now, I've seen this ash statue before, and while I know a bit of its lore, I don't want to comment about its origins just yet. For that, I'll wait for the possible big reveal from the questline itself. However, there's a good chance that a lot of you already know what this ash statue is and what it represents. Regardless, I entered Aldrune's temple and sought out Serano. Speaking with him, he was apparently expecting my visit. Bringing up the statue, he says to hand it over, as with it, he can try and clear Varvur's name. Handing the piece over, Loros takes a second to examine it. He soon comes to the conclusion that the statue has some sort of conjuration enchantment tied to it. Said enchantment was what bewitched Varvur into killing Braelyn. Serano believes that Varvur might still be under the statue's influence. So, the next steps are for Varvur to visit Loros and to wait in the temple while the effects wear off. After that's done, Serano will be able to clear Varvur's name. Really though, at this point in time, the only thing required of the player is to return to Athen and inform him of the plan. Before leaving, you might have noticed that Serano has duties as a dialogue prompt. He too is one of the faction's many quest givers, and rest assured, I'll be onto his story arc before long. Returning to the counselor, he thanks me for my efforts and feels somewhat validated in his beliefs. However, it's not lost on him that this whole ordeal will still come with more backlash. With that, thus ends the quest, clear Varvur Sarethi's name. Chatting with Athen again, I asked him for my next set of duties. The councilman informed me that a member of House Hlaano has been slandering Redoran's Archmagister. Ondres Nerano is spreading rumors that Bolvin Venom is having an affair with another councilman's wife. While Athen doesn't know what goes on behind closed doors, he says that he can't let the accusations continue. Sarethi wants me to travel to Balmora and put an end to Nerano's slander. Like the quest, Founder's Helm, I can't murder or assault Ondres, but if he refuses to back down, I can challenge him to a duel. Exiting Underscar and traveling to Balmora, I began asking around for Nerano's whereabouts. This is where some of the locals tell me that he has a manor in the Plaza district. Heading over there, I scoped out each house until I stumbled onto the Nerano nameplate. Entering the residence, Ondres was the only NPC on the main level. Confronting the Dunmer, he asked me why I was here, and that's when I brought up the slander. He almost sounded confused at first. He claims that he was telling the truth about Bolvin. Before we could get into any sort of civilized or progressive conversation though, he insulted House Redaran and demanded that we dueled right here and now. With little choice, I agreed to the challenge. Nerano is placed at level 19, but he's no fighter. He uses his fists in the duel and knows a couple of spells, but they're all fortifications and resistances. With that being said, any brawler who's actually good at throwing a punch can be a really annoying opponent, especially if your fatigue is already worse for wear. As soon as that fatigue hits 0, Ondres will be able to drop you to the ground, so let's just say I tried to avoid that at all costs. Luckily for me though, after bringing him down to less than half HP, the Hlaano nobleman surrendered. He complimented my combat skills and vowed to withdraw his statements on Venom. With the matter officially taken care of, I recalled to Aldrun and reported to Athen. Really, all the counselor did was affirm my actions, but hey, a win's a win. With that, thus ends the quest, Ondres Nerano's Slanders. Speaking with the counselor again, I asked him for more work. Athen told me that he believes there are smugglers operating out of Shurinbaal, a cave on Vardenfell's coastline. Inquiring further, he tells me that Shurinbaal is southwest of Narmok. Sarethi has heard that the smugglers are led by a Dunmer named Daradur and a Red Guard named Engine. I'm to take out the leaders and clear the cave. Athen also mentions that the smugglers might have a contact here in Aldrun. He thinks it's worth looking into who that may be. Now, the last part of his request ends up being semi-interesting, but for the wrong reasons. Asking around Aldrun, no one has the smugglers or Shurinbaal as a dialogue prompt. Even the inns are pretty silent on these topics. However, there is one NPC who actually has the cave as a topic, and if you watched my Imperial Legion video, you'll probably recognize him. Drynar Varian is a Dunmer who lives right across from the Aldskar Inn. Drynar is a self-proclaimed pottery researcher. Asking him about Shurinbaal, he tells me to quote, "Take my questions somewhere else, Gwarfetcher." Following this is a 20-point decrease to his disposition. Unfortunately, nothing more comes of this interaction, but I think it's safe to say that he's the culprit. What's more, through the Imperial Legion questline, it's confirmed that he is a smuggler, as he has dwarven artifacts hidden among his vases and pots. I guess if not for the quest, then at least it's for our peace of minds, right? Now it's onto the dungeon itself. As described by Athen, Shurinbaal is located southwest of Narmok. Traveling to the coastal village, I began my search. Having been around the block, I knew to look for the cave's entrance in sort of tall and bulky rocks. Locating the doors to the dungeon, I went on in and immediately got jump scared by Engine. She was clearly expecting company and I fell right into her lap. Luckily though, once she was taken care of, I just had to find Daradur. However, of course Daradur was going to be at the very end of the dungeon, past all his guards and his henchmen. Shurinbaal only has one zone to it, but said zone holds 9 enemies. All of the NPCs vary in classes, races, and gear. The lowest level is 10, while the highest is 16, which is Daradur himself. Some fun facts about this dungeon: Cetus, an Imperial agent in here, is actually a trainer in Speechcraft, Light Armor, and Sneak. If the player can successfully calm him down, or sneak up to him, you can get access to his services. It's safe to say though that for me, the ship has sailed. Some other notes I read on the wiki include Drynar's sister being in Shurinbaal. Apparently, Dovrosi Varian, a Dark Elf rogue, is related to the Master of Pottery back in Aldrun. He's probably gonna hate me even more when I come back to the city. Then lastly, Galtis Sarethi, one of the other smugglers in here, drops an amulet of Mark. This is apparently the only guaranteed drop for this amulet in the base game. Even I did a double take on it, as it's not something I recalled ever coming across before. Back to the matter at hand, once Darador and the gang were defeated, I was free to return to Aldrun. However, worth noting is the mass amount of loot available in Shurinbaal. In the room where Darador was hiding, there are a bunch of crates and barrels. Almost all of them contain enchanted gear, decent sums of gold, and other little knickknacks like potions, jewels, and weapons. If not for a new loadout, these are definitely worth it for the extra pocket change. Once done, I recalled to Aldrun and spoke with Athen. The counselor was happy to hear that the smugglers would no longer be a problem for the house. With that, thus ends the quest, Shurinbaal. Up next is a pretty lengthy quest, but I have to say that it's been my favorite one so far. Chatting again with Sarethi, I asked him for my next set of duties. This is where Athen tells me that a member of House Redoran is wreaking havoc on some of the locals. Erethan Mandis has turned mad. He's claimed himself to be the Lord of Westgash. On top of that, he's also been demanding tribute from locals and travelers. Athen would like me to put an end to Lord Mandis' tyranny. According to the counselor, the Mad Lord could be found in the Cavern of Milk. Accompanying him are loyal followers, as well as recently recruited outlaws. Sarethi believes that they won't go down without a fight. He then gives me directions on how to get to Milk. Before leaving, the councilman does call attention to another important player. Athen believes it's better that Atherin stays alive. He thinks that the Lord's father, Laerar Mandis, might know how to cure his madness. Laerar can be found in the settlement of Ebonheart. This quest certainly has some layers to it. If you really wanted to bulldoze through the mission, you could easily head to Milk, fight through Mandis' warriors, and slay the Mad Lord. However, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. Traveling to Ebonheart, I began my search for Laerar. The Dunmer Lord could be found in the Grand Council chamber, which just toward the back of the outpost. I located Mandis Sr. by the entrance and sparked up a conversation. Asking about his son, Laerar believes that Erethan's badness was caused by the kidnapping of his daughter. Delina Mandis was captured by House Tilvani some time ago, right about when Erethan started to spiral. Delina is being held in Telfur, and Laerar urges me to rescue her at once. Telfur is the Telvanni tower that belongs to Devaithfur, a very old Telvanni wizard. Devaith plays a major role in Morrowind's main questline, so I'm pretty familiar with his character. While I don't know him all that well, he's a pretty interesting fellow. At least in terms of his tower and his belongings, he doesn't care all that much for them. If you're able to take things from his domain and not die in the process, then he considers them to be yours. Traveling to Telfur, I entered the tower and approached one of Devaith's daughter wives. Yeah, this guy's pretty weird. When asked about Delina, she said that I'd need to talk directly to Devaith about that one. Luckily for me, I remembered where the wizard's quarters were. Otherwise, it's a long and confusing search. Entering the Hall of Fur and levitating to the top, I spotted the Telvanni and approached with caution. Just because he's an important NPC, that doesn't take away from the fact that we're from rivaling factions. Fortunately, our conversation was rather civil. He did insult me by calling my character boring, but sticks and stones. When asked about Delina, he said that he didn't quite recall who that was. Apparently, many people have come and gone from Telfur. A lot of treasure hunters, spies, and adventurers come to steal his research and riches. While he welcomes the challenge, most people end up getting lost, dying, or worse, become inflicted with Corpus and the Corpusarium. Devaith welcomes me to look for Delina, although he's unsure of her fate. Looking around the Hall of Fur first, the only NPCs are Devaith and his daughter wives. The daughters haven't changed their answer on Delina, so it's still a boots-on-ground type of search. Once the Hall of Fur was cleared, I moved back to the Onyx Hall. Exploring the opposite end of the area, I came across a locked and trapped golden door. It was secured by a level 60 lock. Casting an open spell and tanking the enchantment, I poked my head inside and finally spotted the lost Mandis. Speaking with Delina, she asked who I was and if her father had sent me. Word traveled that Arethan went mad, and while she's heartbroken at the news, the Dunmer believes that she has a way to cure him. Wasting no more time, I told Delina to follow me, and together we left Telfur. Once outside, she thanked me for the rescue and handed me her locket. Delina explains that she has other pressing matters to attend to, and can't visit her father just yet. However, when I run into Arethan, he'll recognize her locket and know that she's safe. With a breakthrough in the quest, I decided to tell Laerar about his granddaughter first. Heading to Ebonheart and entering the Grand Council chamber, the Redoran Lord certainly didn't disappoint. He was overjoyed to hear about Delina's rescue and told me that I made a new ally in House Redoran. As a reward, Lara gifts me an ebony closed helm. With the optional chapter at an end, it's time to finally confront the Mad Lord of Milk. As per Athen's directions, Milk is located somewhere in between Aldrun and Gnisis. Taking the road west and paying attention to the signs, I soon hit the described landmark and veered north. Before long, I landed at the cave's entrance. Entering Milk, I still had more work cut out for me. Even though I come as an emissary of House Redoran and am here to cure the Lord, his followers don't care. They still attack on sight, and unfortunately, I'm forced to take them out. Milk only has one zone to it. Said zone contains 7 bandits and Arethin himself. Of course, Lord Mandus is located towards the back of the cave, so I had to fight my way through almost all of his subjects. They range from level 13 all the way to level 19. They're all dark elves and have varying classes. Knights, bards, crusaders, witch hunters, you name it. Eventually, I battled my way through 6 bandits and landed on Arethin. Luckily, Mandus was non-hostile, and I was able to tell him about his daughter. Arethin was a rambling lunatic. None of his sentences made sense. However, because I had context clues, I could put together something about the locket and Delina. When Delina was brought up, he demanded to know if she was alive or not. From here, I told him that his daughter was safe and handed him her locket. Interestingly, that's all it really took to snap him out of his mad spell. He started speaking normally again and even regrets how he acted. However, Arethin doesn't really take accountability for his actions, as he blames the road attacks on his guards. Also, he ends the conversation by telling Athen to stop in for a visit. While it's odd, my job here is done. Recalling to Aldrun, I reported my success to Athen. While the councilman doesn't believe Mandus has really snapped out of it, he recognizes that the threat from his guards has come to an end. Sarethi thanks me for my efforts and says that he's proud of all that I've accomplished. With that, thus ends the quest, the Mad Lord of Milk. Chatting with Athen once more, I asked him for my next set of duties. This is where Sarethi tells me that that's it for him, at least for now. In order to progress further with his storyline and to advance in general, I need the support of 2 more council members and have to build a stronghold. I'm not even sure what the latter entails, so at this point, I decided to pack my bag and head for the big city. Before, Theldin mentioned that I can meet with someone named Feral Retharan in the Redoran treasury. She's a quest giver for the faction and the next arc in my storyline. So, making my way to the Redoran Canton and entering the plaza, I located the bank and found my contact. Speaking with Feral, she introduced herself as the House Redoran steward for Vivek. Without missing a beat, I got into the nitty-gritty and asked her for work. This was where Retharan informed me that there's more slander coming out of House Hlaanu. A nobleman's son, Hlaano, is talking badly about the faction. Feral would like me to travel to Balmora and make Hlaano withdraw his statements. Meril's at the 8 plates, and while the steward doesn't make mention of it, I already know the drill. Don't bring on shame for House Redoran. Before leaving, I moved my mark spell for easier transportation. Now, exiting Vivek, I took a Silt Strider to Caius' ends and entered the tavern. The Hlaanu Slanderer was standing in the entrance of the bar area. Sizing him up, I approached Meril and confronted him. When asked to stop with the slander, he simply replies with, "Make me." At this point, there are 2 outcomes to the quest. The first, and in my opinion, the most satisfying one, is to cast Frenzy on him. Like discussed before, this sends Hlaano into an uproar. He pulls out a sword and starts swinging for the fences. Since he made the first move, killing him is merely self-defense. Meril is placed at level 9, and at this point, the player would have dealt with much trickier foes. Once the nobleman was dead, I returned to Feral and reported my success. Although, the steward's reaction wasn't quite what I expected. She recognized that I had gotten the job done, but I suppose the violence alone was enough to bring dishonor on House Redoran. Retharan ends up blaming it on my character being an outlander and not understanding their ways and customs. Now, reverting back, option number 2, the less satisfying one, is to raise Hlaano's disposition. Doing so via charm and asking about the slander, he vowed to withdraw his statements against House Redoran. Recalling to Vivek and sharing the news with Feral, this time she was more pleased with the result. As a reward, Retharan gives me a holy shield. It's an enchanted bone mold shield and restores 10 points of health on self. With that, thus ends the quest, Meril Hlaano's Slander. Chatting with Ferrell again, I asked for more duties. The steward tells me that relics belonging to the Redas family have been gifted to House Redoran. The only thing is that someone from the house needs to go and retrieve them from the Redas Tomb, and that someone is going to be me. The 3 relics in question are the Redas War Axe, the Redas Chalice, and the Redas Robe of Deeds. Ferrell gives me instructions on how to reach the tomb, and from there, I set off for the Azura's Coast region. I highly recommend not following Rethoran's advice. She tells the player that the tomb is located south of Morlagmar. However, the mountains are apparently too tall to go over. So she suggests veering wide, going around the mountains, and then following the path back inward. After trying it myself though, I found that the mountains were just fine to walk through, and if you have means of levitation, all the better. Within a matter of moments, I crossed through the terrain and ended up near the Redas family tomb. The other landmarks she said to watch out for were an Ashlander camp and a Daedric ruin. Heading on inside, it was time to keep my eyes peeled and to have my sword at the ready. The tomb consists of one zone. Said zone contains all Daedric enemies. There are a variety of them, and some are pretty strong, while others are easier to take on. As for the Redas relics, 2 of them are close to the entrance, while the third is, of course, at the back of the tomb. The Robe of Deeds and the Chalice, or rather the Goblet, yes, the misnaming held me back for quite some time here, are in a nearby side room. Meanwhile, the axe is at the end of the line, protected by a Dremora and a Storm Atronach. Once all of the relics were acquired, I was good to leave the ancestral tomb. Recalling to Vivek, I reported to Ferrell. Handing the items to the steward, she thanked me for my efforts and told me to check back if I needed more work. With that, thus ends the quest, Redas Tomb. Slowly, things are picking up with House Redoran. We've seen that tensions are not only high with the other great houses, but there are also a lot of problems within the faction itself. Whether these troubles go away on their own, or get much worse, only time will tell. Returning to Rethoran, I asked her for my next set of duties. Ferrell told me that a member of House Redoran, Rothis Nethan, has dishonored the faction. He no-showed for a duel against a member of House Hlaano. Ferrell would like me to find Rothis and convince him to attend said duel. The steward shares that Rothis is likely hiding at the Flowers of Gold Corner Club. This establishment is in the wasteworks of the Redoran Canton. Exiting the plaza and running next door, I cased a couple of the rooms until I found said corner club. Descending to the lower level and shoving my nose in everyone's face, I located the Dunmer with Nethan's nameplate. Chatting with Rothis, he asked if I was here regarding the duel. Telling him yes, he posed an incredibly good question. Nethan said that he's no warrior, he's a scholar. Why should he risk his life in some ego-based duel to the death against the rivaling faction? If it were up to me, I probably would have left it at that, as it seems fair. Nethan's no warrior, and his life is dedicated to study and research. Unfortunately, Ferrell Rethoran probably wouldn't be as understanding, and the show must go on. So, charming Rothis and trying again, the Dunmer gave in and agreed to fight his battle. However, he does have one condition. Nethan needs standard health potions, 10 of them to be exact. With them, he feels as though that'll even the odds of the duel. Rothis suggests that I try buying them from Rels Gilvalo, a priest over in the Redoran Temple. The grounds for dueling in Morrowind have always sort of confused me. Can anyone be challenged to a duel for any reason? And if you just so happen to belong to some faction or house, is it dishonorable to decline the duel? If I were the best warrior that House Redoran had to offer, I'd probably just constantly challenge the other house's initiates and wipe out their lower ranking members. Surely there's some rule or etiquette in place, but maybe not. Maybe that's something that would actually fly. In any case, I located realms in the temple and purchased Rothis' potions for over 200 gold. Something tells me I'm not getting recompensated for them. Rushing back to Nethan and handing them over, he says to meet him at the arena, likely to watch the fight. Getting ready to cheer him on as he is my guildmate / housemate, I went on over to the arena canton and poked my head over the ledge. I winced pretty much right away. This was the mismatch of a century. A dweeby scholar wielding a dagger versus a Hlaano caster in full armor. A couple of destruction spells later, and Rothis was dead. Luckily for me, the outcome didn't really matter. Unfortunately for the house, one of our members was forced into his own death. Regardless, I recalled to the treasury and reported to Rethoran. All she really said was that the duel was over and House Redoran's honor was restored. I guess all it took was the death of Redoran's brightest up-and-coming minds. With that, thus ends the quest, Duel of Honor. Speaking with the steward again, I asked her for some more work. Farrell tells me that one of the Dunmer strongholds, Phalasmarian, has been taken over by Dagoth Tanis. Phalasmarian is located northeast of Margon. Apparently, House Redoran had already sent a buoyant armiger to the stronghold, Irir Nervian. However, Irir hasn't been heard from since, so my jobs are to slay Dagoth Tanis and to confirm Nervian's status. If he's dead, I need to retrieve his ancestor ring so that it can be returned to his family. Now, while the 6th house hasn't fully come up in conversation yet, their time in the limelight officially begins. Dagoth Tanis is an ash creature. These beings shouldn't be taken lightly, as they could be pretty powerful and carry around diseases like blight. Typically, Dunmer strongholds are fairly big and have more than a few zones to them, so navigation is probably the trickiest part to this quest, right behind House Dagoth's servants, of course. Arriving at Phalasmarian, I first entered a small building called Missin Akin's hut. Surprisingly, this held a lone NPC named Missin Akin, and he was non-hostile. Since he has nothing to do with the quest, I left him alone, but apparently he's a master trainer for marksmen, so that was pretty neat to discover. Next, I entered the biggest building of the stronghold, the lower level. This zone contained all sorts of ash creatures. There were ash slaves, ash zombies, and there was even another named servant, Dagoth Gnel. Gnel is an ash ghoul and is level 14. Ash ghouls can prove to be pretty tricky opponents. I remember my first fight with one. Granted, I was a really low level, it took me probably more than a dozen tries to kill it. Luckily, now they aren't really issues anymore. About a minute or two into my run, I wandered into one of Phalasmarian's side rooms. Here, I stumbled onto the corpse of the buoyant armiger. Needless to say, Irir was not successful in his quest. Grabbing the Nervian ancestor ring, I put it into my inventory and continued on with my mission. If not for Farrell or House Redoran, then at least I'd be doing it to avenge Nervian. Running a circuit around the lower level, battling through more ash creatures and dreamers, I finally located my target, Dagoth Tanis. Tanis is a level 20 ascended sleeper. The sleepers are pretty freaky looking. They also have a decent amount of health and access to a whole arsenal of spells. Depending on if you get caught up in set attacks, the sleepers could be a real problem. I've always found it easier to close out the distance and force their hands at melee combat. They're much easier to handle that way. Once Tanis was defeated, I killed its dreamer bodyguards and began looting the place. As expected, the treasures were abundant. Scrolls, potions, gold, weapons, you name it. However, something even more curious was the altar at the chamber's center. Here, there were dozens of ash statues, the very same ones that I found in Varvur Sarethi's room. While most of you probably knew to make the connection, as it's something you learn about in the main quest, that's the big kicker here. Varvur Sarethi was brainwashed by Dagoth and the 6th house. The ultimate goal is to create soldiers via bewitchment, and then to reconquer their homeland of Resdain, or Morrowind. While it's not the last we'll see of the 6th house, House Dagoth isn't really the main focal point for the Redoran questline, so it's best not to get too attached to their presence. Once wrapped up, I recalled to Vivek and reported back to Farrell. Handing the steward Nervian's ring, she thanks me for my efforts. She's saddened to hear about Irir's death, but takes solace in knowing his ring can be sent off to his family. As a reward, she gives me an enchanted ring called the Ancestor's Ring. With it, I can summon an ancestral ghost to aid me in battle. Thankfully, I'm not a Dunmer, or else this reward would feel pretty useless. With that, thus ends the quest, Slay Dagoth Tanis. Chatting with Retharin again, I asked her for my next set of duties. This is where the steward tells me that in order to progress, I need to build and expand my own stronghold. This is something that I'm definitely building up to, but first, there are other simpler quests that need completing. Thinking about my time through House Redoran, the priest Loros Serrano comes to mind. Through his dialogue prompts, it was clear that he had his own set of tasks for me. Plus, after coming off a quest related to the 6th house and seeing all of those ash statues, his story arc feels pretty relevant. So, traveling to Aldrun and heading on into the temple, I sought out the priest and asked for work. Interestingly, I guess our previous task together was never truly completed. My job with Sarethi was, as his son was cured of the enchantment. However, Loros has been waiting for me to find out where Varvur got the ash statue from, and it didn't pop up as a new journal entry. So, making up for the lost time, I rushed to Scar and entered Sarethi Manor. Going inside the guard quarters and entering Varvur's room, I began chatting with the young noble. Asking about the ash statue, Sarethi says that he finally remembers how he got a hold of it. A man by the name of Galtus Govran handed it to Varvur while he was at the Rat in the Pot. Exiting Scar and heading to the tavern, I located Govran in the lower levels. Speaking with Galtus, he asked what I wanted, and I brought up the ash statue. This was enough to trigger something in the Dunmer. He seemed baffled at first, as he was likely unsure of how I learned about them. However, he quickly disregarded that thought and vowed to, quote, "take care of this right now." As the conversation ended, Govran pulled out his blade and began slashing. The Dunmer is placed at level 7, but his class is Pawnbroker, and he doesn't have much, shall we say, ferocity to him. A couple of swings with my sword and Galtus was down for the count. Looking at his inventory, the Mer had 3 ash statues on him, as well as some kind of note. Taking the note, it reads, "Here is another crate of statues. These are to be placed here in Aldrun. Place the statues quickly and wisely. Destroy this note. Do not disappoint me again. Signed, Hanurai." Thankfully, Galtus didn't do his job right, as now I have another lead. Returning to Loros, I shared my experience with him. Serrano connects the dots and thinks that Hanurai is one of the residents in town. Miss Aselenapal claims to be an outcast Ashlander, but I guess the jig is now up. She has a house in Aldrun, and Loros would like me to continue my investigation. Since he has no idea what I'll be up against, the priest gives me 4 quality restore health potions, 1 potion of cure blight, and 1 potion of cure common disease. Exiting the temple and searching around town, I finally came across Hanurai's house. Readying myself, I entered the residence and found the woman in question. For the time being, she was non-hostile, but that would quickly come to change. Speaking with her, I brought up the ash statues. Lo and behold, Setlanapal got triggered like Galtus and armed herself for a fight. Her dialogue makes it seem like she knows she's going down, so this is her last-ditch effort. Hanurai is placed at level 10, and her class is an agent. Honestly, the fight feels pretty similar to the one with Govran. 2 non-fighters trying to take on the Nervarine. What could possibly go wrong, right? Once she was dead, I had a look around her home. Descending to the basement and unlocking the door down there, I uncovered her shrine to House Dagoth. It was pretty obvious, but now it's confirmed. Galtus and Hanurai were members of the 6th house. They were attempting to brainwash all of Aldrun in order to gain a greater hold over the city. Well, with the plan foiled, I recalled to Loros and shared the news with him. Apparently, Hanurai's death caused the ash statues to lose all of their influence. Aldrun is safe, for now. But Serrano thinks that we should stay vigilant, as you never know who's secretly working for House Dagoth. With that, thus ends the quest, Ash Statue. Chatting with the priest again, I asked him for some more duties. Loros tells me that one of his pilgrims has gone missing. Fedris Tharen was embarking on the Ruddy Man pilgrimage. He left weeks ago, but it's been a couple of days since he's last checked in. Theron's last confirmed location was Gnisis. He's attempting to make it to Coal Mine, which is just south of the city. Serrano would like me to head over there and begin looking for him. Pilgrimages are a pretty common thing here on Vardenfell. There are a couple of routes that the player can even do themselves, and there are a handful of side quests and faction quests that involve escorting pilgrims to their shrine. As for this quest, well, let's just say that Fedris is in a bit of a pickle. Slight spoiler there. Reaching Gnisis and asking around for him, everyone says that he had already left for Coal Cave. Like mentioned before, the cave is south of town. Moreover, if you directly cross the stream and just follow the winding path southwest, you'll spot the pilgrim in no time. He's right outside his destination, which is pretty peculiar. Speaking with him, Fedris pleads for help as he's feeling ill. He asks for something that could possibly help him, and because I have a potion of cure disease in my inventory, I'm able to hand it over. Tharen takes it and claims to already feel better. Beyond that, there's not much else to do here. The quest and conversation kind of just ends there. The pilgrim insists on continuing with his journey, and my job is done. I was lucky that I had that potion on me, otherwise I would have had to do a bit of back and forth. Honestly, This quest felt a little weird, as all of the other recent ones have been a little more fleshed out and lengthier. This one felt a little too short and easy, but I guess it's Serrano's second quest, and therefore could be done pretty early on into the House Redoran storyline. Regardless, with everything taken care of, I recalled to Aldrun and reported to Loros. The priest thanked me for my efforts, and as a reward, he gifted me 4 potions of cure common disease. In his words, they're to make up for my sacrifice, although I'm pretty sure he was the one who gave me the potion in the first place. In any case, with that, thus ends the quest. Find Fedris Tharen. Chatting with Loros again, I asked him for some more work. This is where the priest informed me that yet another pilgrim has gone missing. Beden Giladren was en route from Aldrun to Margon. He hasn't been heard from since, and Serrano would like me to find him. In my opinion, this quest ends up being a lot more entertaining than the last one. There's a little more to it, and there are a couple of different outcomes. Traveling to Margon, I began asking around for Beden. One of the guards told me to check in with someone named Trellis Redas over at the shrine. Redas might know more about any missing pilgrims. Heading over there and seeking out the priest, I retried my luck with the inquiry. Trellis thinks on it and says that he might know of Beden's whereabouts. Not long ago, an Ashlander came by and demanded ransom for someone named Beden Gildaren. This Beden is apparently a Redoran noble, which isn't what Giladren was at all. In any case, that's the best lead I have right now. Exiting the shrine and leaving Margon, I followed the road west until it began to wind south. Soon, I saw an Ashlander tent through the ash storm and knew that that was probably the one. There were 2 Ashlanders outside, but neither of them had any interesting or relevant dialogue. So, heading on inside, I was relieved to see an alive Beden Giladren standing with their leader. Quickly speaking with him, he said that he was fine, but he's being held by the Ashlanders until someone pays the ransom. Turning my attention towards the leader, Manet Shemabadas, he says that he doesn't recognize me and asks what I want. Inquiring about Beden, Manet says that this famous Redoran noble only gets released for 5,000 drakes. Trust me, I want to impress House Redoran pretty badly, but I don't want to spend 5,000 gold on this schmuck. From here, there are 3 options. One is to, of course, pay the really expensive fee. There's no recompensation for this though, and can be a huge financial hit. Another is to decline ransom and slay the Ashlanders. Technically, there's no penalty for this, so you just have to prepare to fight 2 level 7s and 1 level 14. However, the third option is where things get pretty fun, and in my opinion, everyone wins. The Nervarine can actually question Beden's nobleman status. Hearing this, Manet gets confused and asks if I'm even familiar with Giladren. From here, I assure the leader that Beden is not famous. In response, Manet asks me to clarify this with the pilgrim. Speaking with Giladren, he confesses that he lied to the Ashlanders. He was worried that they'd kill him, so therefore, Beden told the outcasts that he's a very important figure with one of Vvardenfell's most important houses. Relaying this to Manet, he calls Beden a liar and a coward, which of course he is. Fortunately, the leader is now willing to cut the pilgrim loose for only 5 septims. Paying this petty fee, I told Giladren that he was one lucky guy. The Dunmer insists that from here, he'll be okay and wishes to complete his pilgrimage. Sounding good enough for me, I recalled to Aldrun and reported back to Loros. The priest thanked me and said that he'd make sure my deeds are relayed to House Redoran. With that, thus ends the quest, Find Beden Giladren. Chatting again with Serrano, I asked him for some more duties. Loros tells me that a group of Redoran soldiers were sent to the Dunmer Stronghold and Andasreth in hopes of taking it over. However, the soldiers haven't reported in, and the priest fears the worst. He asks me to head to the Stronghold then to find out what's happened to them. If they are indeed dead, Loros wants me to recover their house shields and return them to him. Serrano marks Andasreth on my map, and from here it's time to make my way over. All things considered, there are less objectives for this quest than there were for the previous Stronghold-based mission. As of right now, there aren't necessarily any targets for me to hunt down. I'm just checking in on the status of the house's men-at-arms. Traveling to Narmok and pushing past Kartag Point, I immediately ran into Andasreth's welcome wagon. 3 archers started firing their arrows from the Stronghold's rooftop. Obviously, this was an immediate threat, but their presence and numbers implied that the men-at-arms might not be so hot. Taking them out, I moved to the ground floor and entered the lower level. Andasreth was crawling with bandits. In total, there were 15 ruffians stationed here. Of those baddies, the lowest level was 6 and the highest level was 18. They're all dark elves and their classes ranged from archers, rogues, battle mages, agents, and thieves. Again, just by the sheer number of bandits, I prepared myself for the worst when it came to those Redoran soldiers. After clearing the upper level of Andasreth, the dungeon's second zone, I moved back to the lower level and continued my search. After doing so, it didn't take me very long to land on the Lost Warriors. Unlocking a nearby door, I wandered into a small side room and saw the dead bodies of 4 House Redoran guards. It appears as though they were killed and stuffed away in this room to hide any sort of evidence. I continued down the hallway for a bit longer and cleared out what might have been the last of the bandits. It was hard to tell though, as I wasn't really keeping count. Regardless, feeling like I upheld some kind of justice today, I recalled to Aldrun and reported to Loros. He was saddened to hear the news, but similar to the Armiger, he's at peace knowing that the soldiers' families get to have their loved one's shield. As a reward, the priest offers me a shield of my own. I don't really need it, but decided to take it anyway. The shield is just a basic Redoran banner shield, but it's the first bit of Redoran paraphernalia that I've acquired, so I'll take it. With that, thus ends the quest, recover shields from Andasreth. Speaking again with Loros, I asked for some more work. This is where he informed me that that was it for him. The priest said that our time together had finally come to an end and suggested that I talk to either Athen or Farrell. Funnily enough, both of these quest givers need me to build that stronghold in order to progress, so maybe the time has finally come. However, Athen would end up being my next target, as thinking back on it, he actually told me what the next story arc was. In order to advance in rank, I need to gain the support of at least 2 more counselors. According to Sarethi, the best 2 to start with would be Hlaaren Ramarin and Barara Morvayn. Athen does give me a word of warning though for both council members. Both families have recently gone through some difficult times. Sarethi isn't sure what tasks they'll make me do and how many I'll need to complete. Sounding fair enough, I exited Sarethi Manor and went on inside of Ramarin Manor. Hlaaren was in the next zone over, the private quarters. Finding the councilman and speaking with him, he knew exactly what I was here for. Ramarin knew that I needed his support, and his opening line included the task at hand. He needs me to collect taxes from Gnisis. Honestly, it doesn't sound too difficult. The usual collector is feeling unwell, so I'll be filling in for him. The job description is simple enough. I speak with Hetman Abomawiya and ask for the town's cut. I was trying to remember if this quest was a double whammy. I remember chatting with the Hetman during another questline for some other purpose, but after looking it up, he appears to be just involved in some Legionnaire quests, but unrelated to the taxes. Now, as for this task, it really is as simple as it sounds. Honestly, the hardest part was finding the Hetman's hut, as no one is able to direct me there. Once inside, I asked for the taxes and there was no fuss or fight. He asked for a moment, collected the 60 drakes, and happily handed them over. There was no conversation beyond that. Again, this quest can be completed pretty early on, so no point in overcomplicating it for new players. Returning to Aldrun, I went back to Ramarin Manor and reported to Hlaaren. On the subject of taxes, I have the ability to either hand it all over or shortchange him by 10 septims. The latter is actually a really bad idea. For a mere 10 gold, I can get kicked out of House Redoran and would have to cease all operations with the faction. Yeah, probably not worth it for what, an iron dagger? So, giving the full 60 over, Hlaaren is ultimately pleased with my efforts. However, as this task ends, the next one begins. He'd like me to check in on an old acquaintance of his. With that, thus ends the quest, Taxes from Gnisis. Resuming my conversation with Hlaaren, I asked him about this old acquaintance. Apparently, Nalvilie Saren is someone he was involved with when he was younger. Hlaaren wonders what became of her. He believes that her family has a manor in Vivek's Redoran Canton. Ramarin tells me to relay the message that he doesn't care about the past. He believes he can support her and invites her out here to Aldrun. Admittedly, I thought the woman standing next to Hlaaren was his wife. I was in disbelief that he'd say all these things with her right there. So, getting the scoop from the Dunmer herself, it turns out that she's not his partner. Nalvilie Saren is actually Ramarin's servant, but the plot thickens when she's asked about the councilman. She loves working for Hlaron, and often finds it, shall we say, distracting to be around him. When asked about Nalvilie, the claws come out. Nalvina believes that Ramarin is wasting his time. Saren has disgraced her family and disrespected the Lord. Sarethi rants on and almost confesses something, but quickly retracts it, as quote, it would not be proper. Well, playing matchmaker, it's time to open the gates of love. First, I figured I'd pay a visit to Vivec and find Nalvilie. As it would turn out, her family does have a manor in Redoran's Plaza district. However, whatever Nalvilie did in the past, the wounds are still open and they're still deep. Even with a charm spell, everyone in her clan says the same thing about her. She's disgraced the family and that's that. It took me a bit to find someone who was willing to talk about her. However, after finding Taurus Saren and popping the question, he hit me with an Uno reverse. Taurus said that if he tells me about her, I have to promise to leave the manor and never mention Nalvilie in front of him again. I'm telling you, this topic is only getting spicier. Agreeing to his terms, Taurus finally spills the beans. The outcast Saren owns a business in the St. Oms Canton. She could be found in the Southside Canals. Taurus ends the conversation by reiterating that she's disgraced herself and that she disgraces anyone whom she speaks with. Now, you might be asking yourself, what could Nalvilie possibly have done? I myself am wondering the same thing. Everyone dislikes her, even her own flesh and blood. Really, the only person that vies for her is Hlaron Ramarin. Maybe that might tip you off as to what could have happened. Finding Saren's shop and speaking with her, the opening line is all the player needs for the dialogue. Nalvilie is surprised to hear that Hlaron still wants to meet with her, even if it means taking on some shame. However, she declines the request, saying that even at her lowest point, the answer is still no. She never liked how the councilman always hung around her like a quote, lost scrib. So it seems like Hlaron has tried courting her before, and he's still got no game, even as a council member of House Redoran, one of the most influential factions in all of Vardenfell. At first, I thought Nalvilie disgraced herself by turning down Ramarin, a pretty unfair circumstance. However, it turns out that Nalvilie is actually pretty promiscuous. This is what's hinted at as to why she's been disgraced. Again though, an unfair circumstance. According to several Dunmer men, she's been around the block. Enohlalu, Elmslervu, Nalis Gals, and even Atherin Sarethi call her out for quote, giving a lot of favors to men. Honestly though, the best part is that not even wealth and security could bring her over to Hlaron Ramarin. Ramarin is truly the incels champion. In any case, returning to Aldrun and breaking the news to the counselor, for some reason, the conversation defaults to Nalvilie being dead. I guess my character felt that it was too embarrassing to deliver the real news, so he just made up a lie. Either way, Ramarin gives me his full support as a counselor. Now, what's interesting is that the player can bring up Nalvilie Saren to Hlaron. I can tell him how his servant truly feels. This gets Ramarin's mind racing. He's unsure what to say and thinks that due to his age and the circumstances, it would be improper. From there, my character is able to convince him. I'm not really sure what he would have said, but Ramarin decides to at least consider the possibility of it. If I had come to him sooner regarding Nalvina, I actually could have avoided the whole Nalvilie arc, but hey, lore is lore, and it's juicy lore at that. With that, thus ends the quest, Nalvilie Saren. With Hlaron giving me his full support as councilman, I moved on to my next mark. According to Athen, Brara Morvayn is the widow of Remus. All Sarethi says to accompany that is that Morvayn Manor has been overrun, but he doesn't say by whom or what. Brara currently resides in the council hall. Rushing over to the entrance and entering the hall portion, it was like Monsters Inc. in here. There were doors leading to just about every Redoran member's home. Finding the right one took me longer than I'd care to admit, but eventually I landed on the Morvayn temp housing. Speaking with the widow, she asked if Athen sent me over, because if so, she's already got a task in mind. Brara would like me to clear the remaining beasts from Morvayn Manor. Her late husband, Remus Morvayn, died defending the home. The beasts/creatures are actually abominations from the Ghost Fence. Brara believes that they were drawn to the manor via some mysterious ash statue they received a couple of weeks ago. The objective is to defeat all of the creatures, remove the statue from the home, and deliver the piece to Loris Serrano. As was demonstrated, Serrano knows how to disenchant and destroy the statues. Well, I guess we all know where the statue came from and how it came to be. It's directly from the 6th house, and honestly, The Sarethis are downright lucky that they didn't suffer the same fate as the Morvayns. There's a little more protection in Scar than the outskirts of town, but still, things could have always been worse. Granted, the Sarethis had a just as troubling situation happen to their son, and someone else died for it, but from Athen's perspective, at least his family is still whole. In any case, back to the matter at hand, I entered Morvayn Manor and could instantly hear the deathly groans and snarls of the creatures. Unlocking the basement door and creeping down the stairs, I laid eyes on my targets and got to work. There were 3 corpus stalkers and 2 lame corpuses. These enemies are sort of like zombies, but even worse. They aren't dead, and in fact can never die from natural causes. Corpus keeps its victims alive. They suffer from mutations, rotting skin, blisters, broken bones, just about every horrific deformity under the sun. They aren't tough opponents per se, but their ability to regen health mid-fight makes it so that you have to deal with them rather quickly. Once the corpus beasts were defeated, I paid my respects to Remus by searching his inventory and started to look around for the ash statue. The cursed, ugly piece was sitting on some crates in the upper level of the basement. Snagging it, I got out of the house ASAP and ran over to the temple. Chatting with Loros, I handed him the statue. He said for me to tell Brara that he'd destroy it, and more than likely, the monsters in her basement wouldn't return. Sounding good enough for me, I returned to the council hall and sought out the widow. Mistress Morvayn thanked me for all that I had done. She said that I'd earned her support on the council, and even though she doesn't have much left, she'd like for me to have her amulet. The Amulet of Mighty Blows is a necklace that fortifies strength for 5 to 20 points on self for 30 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Mission to Morvayn Manor. At this point, there are only a handful of quests left for the Redoran storyline. First things first, I need to gather more support from the other council members. I have a couple of ranks to go through still. Also, I need to build that pesky stronghold. It's been looming over my head for quite some time. There's also a whole other quest giver that I haven't really touched on yet. I'm excited to work with them and see what they have to offer. And finally, the tensions in House Redoran come to a boil, and change is definitely coming. It was at this point where I thought to myself, it's finally time. It's time to begin construction on my stronghold. It's been looming over my head for quite some time, and at this point in the game, it's necessary for my progression. I will say this though, I had to break up the stronghold quest into 2 parts. It could be initiated pretty easily, but there are some hard requirements for actually completing the whole thing. Plus, it's a pretty long ordeal, so buckle up. Rushing to Athens Sarethi and asking about how to start, he directs me to someone named Galsa Gindu over in the Redoran Council Hall. Galsa has her own space in Scar, and after knocking down a couple doors, I finally found the noble. Chatting with her, Gindu's dialogue is short and to the point. She asked if I was here regarding my stronghold. Telling her yes, Galsa says that there are a few things I need to get before construction begins. Number 1 is 5,000 drakes, which honestly isn't that bad for late game players. The other is a construction permit from Duke Dren of Ebonheart. According to Galsa, if anyone wants to build on Vvardenfell, they must receive permission from the Duke. The other great houses don't really abide by this, but Gindu says that Redoran is actually honorable and we follow the rules no matter what. Sounding fair enough, I departed from Aldrun and made way for Ebonheart. I really wasn't sure what to expect here. You'd think a construction permit would just cost money or something like that, but what else could the Duke possibly want to know? I'm sure Dren would have some input on what gets built and where, and they probably can't build anything that interferes with the Empire, and I'd assume that he keeps the Ashlanders in mind for these things too. Well, it was time to find out. Entering the Grand Council chambers and ascending to the 2nd floor, I located Vidam Dren and began the conversation. The Duke introduced himself, and with the worst etiquette possible, I jumped straight into the construction contract. Vidam wasn't sure about it at first. With all of the threats on Vvardenfell, likely meaning the 6th house, it might not be wise to focus resources and efforts on a Redoran stronghold. However, Dren gives me a proposition. If I swear to do what I can for the island and its people, he'll grant me the contract. Giving him the old 2 thumbs up, Vidam says that was good enough for him. He told me to use the stronghold in defense of his people and hopes that it'll help in fighting Vvardenfell's enemies. Worth mentioning is that if the player has received the Moon and Star via the main questline, this whole back and forth with Dren doesn't happen, and he happily gives over the contract. With that being said, he also doesn't really put up much of a fight, so it really just saves a few clicks and empty promises. Documents in hand, I returned to Scar and spoke with Gindu. With half of the prerequisites out of the way, Galsa then asks me for the small sum of 5,000 gold. I'm just kidding, by the way, it's not that small. Thrilled with the completed checklist, Gindu tells me that my stronghold will be built in the Baal Isra region. This is in between Margon and Aldrun. The noble says that construction will begin as soon as she sends word. Essentially, now I have to wait a couple of days for an update on the build. This would be a great time to go out and do other quests. You can work on other storylines, improve your skills, and acquire new gear. Or, if you're like my character and have no life, you could just force a couple of rests and wait until the journal entry pops up. Either way, when it was time, I spoke again with Galsa and asked about the Stronghold's progress. She said that she wanted to ensure things were running smoothly over there. So, Gindu asked me to do a site visit and to check in with the foreman. The Stronghold isn't too far away from Aldrun, but it does require a bit of leg power to get there. It's as simple as following the path and making sure that you're getting closer to the marked destination. Upon arrival, I was a little surprised. I really didn't know what I was expecting when everybody talked about a stronghold. I guess I thought about the ancient Dunmer strongholds like Phalasmarian and Andasreth, but looking back, that was probably pretty dumb. It makes sense though that the stronghold is built in the style of traditional Redoran architecture. Plus, if it makes you feel any better, it did for me, it does get better looking. The foreman, Bugdol Gro Carbush, is the only person on site. Speaking with him though, the conversation is brief and all he really says is that everything's going to schedule. So, returning to Aldrun, I checked in with Galsa, and she simply remarked that the work should be finished soon. Forcing a couple more waits, the journal updated and I eagerly asked about the stronghold again. The nobles said that the foundations of my base are complete. However, stage 2 requires me to find some guards to garrison the fort. Gindu suggests that I ask Perseus Mercius at the Fighters Guild Hall, as he may know some swords for hire. Taking her advice, I left the Manor district and popped into the faction's HQ. Locating Perseus, I inquired about hiring the guards. Mercius says that he has a few names he can give me. However, he needs something done in return. His friend, Ferline Akis, has been detained by House Hlaano in Vivec. He'd like for me to free her from their jail. Only after doing so will he give me the list of guards. As Oblivion's beloved Janice Hasseldor once said, "Surprised? Nothing is for free, mage. It's always favors too. It's hardly ever gold or weapons or my company. NPCs always want to take the lazy way out, kinda like me and gold. Regardless, it's a necessity for completing the stronghold. So I made my way to Vivec City and entered the Hlaano Canton. The prison is actually inside of the treasury, which took me a while to figure out, and descending down, things are looking pretty simple in here. There's one guard and there's one prisoner. Chatting with Ferline, she asks if Perseus sent me, and then pleads for her freedom. Akis calls out the Ordinators as being tough opponents, but there are a couple of ways to go about escaping. I can either fight and kill the lone guard, or I can snag one of the universal keys and give it to her. When the time's right, she'll stealthily make her escape. Essentially, one method is loud and proud, while the other is quiet and delicate. Choosing the latter, because violence would be too easy, I began looking for a key. Fortunately, it didn't take long for me to find one, as the guards had a copy placed on the nearby table. Ensuring the Ordinator's gaze was in the opposite direction, I crouched and successfully got a hold of it. Handing it to Ferline, she told me that her escape would take a couple of days, but she mentioned that I could inform Perseus that she'd soon be free. Fingers crossed that that's enough to do the trick with the Fighters Guild. Traveling back to Aldrun and chatting with Mercius, I had a sigh of relief when I got the go-ahead from him. He took my word that Akis would be here soon, and he promised to send the guild's best fighters to the stronghold. With that matter taken care of, I returned to Galsa and asked where we could go from here. Gindu said that with a garrison at the base, Phase 2 of construction could officially begin. So, forcing some more waits, loitering in Galsa's home, and effectively just being a squatter, the journal finally updated. Speaking with the noble and asking about the stronghold, this is when the hard block officially hits. In order to initiate stage 3 of my stronghold, I need to become a Redoran counselor. At the moment, I'm still a house brother, so I have a couple more ranks to get through. For now, that's a pause on the stronghold construction. Alas, with that, thus ends part 1 of the quest, Stronghold. At this point, it seems like the go-to guy for all things House Redoran is Athen Sarethi. If anyone could tell me what's next, it'd be him. So, rushing to the councilman's manor and asking about possible advancements, he does promote me to the rank of Housefather. So now I'm only one rank away from Counselor. However, in order to get to Councilman status, I have a few hurdles to jump over. The first is that I need to gather support from 2 more council members, Garrus Lethri and Minor Erebar. The second is that I need to improve my Stronghold, which obviously doesn't make sense because I literally can't do that without reaching the next rank. However, my fingers are crossed that that's just his dialogue prompt and maybe he's referring to the second phase of construction, which I already did. In any case, the things I can control right now are quests from Garrus and Minor. Starting with Erebar, I wandered into his manor and sought out the Lord. Finding him in the bedroom, I sparked up a conversation but immediately got shot down. Minor knew why I was here and didn't care. He simply said that he could not give me a support and that was that. No rhyme or reason, and there was no changing his mind. Confused, I returned to Athen and relayed the news. Concerned, Sarethi connects the dots and jumps to a pretty crazy conclusion. He believes that the Telvanni are influencing Erebar in some manner. He was acting strange at the councilors' meeting, and considering everything he declined and turned down, including my request, the only possible answer is House Telvanni. Sarethi tells me to start by looking in Sadrith Mora. He believes that whoever's behind this is likely operating out of the village. I'm not gonna lie, this quest was a doozy for me. It started out pretty straightforward. I traveled to Sadrith Mora via boat and spoke with the first NPC that I saw. It was a Telvanni guard, and when asked about Minor Erebar, he gave me a strong lead. Rumor has it that Master Naloth holds some sort of influence over Erebar. For those who don't know, Naloth is a high-ranking member of House Telvanni. He's one of the faction's leaders. If it really is him who's behind all this, well, let's just say that things are gonna get interesting. Naloth resides in the upper tower of Tel Naga, and really the most efficient way, if not the only way to reach him, is via levitation. The Master has a bit of a temper, and he's not much of a people person. So that makes this investigation even trickier. Reaching Naloth and taking a deep breath, his opening line was brief. He said that he didn't have time for me. Charming him, I asked about Erebar. All Naloth said is that it's none of my concern, and he quickly ended the conversation. There was nothing more beyond that. What's worse, no one else in Tel Naga would relay any information to me. Everyone just said that it's none of my business, even with a highly effective charm spell. This is where the quest became a doozy. Everyone I spoke to in Sadrith Mora said the exact same thing. They heard that Naloth had some influence over Erebar, and that's it. No one shared any more details, and I had no idea where to go from here. After using some, shall we say, external resources, I learned that Naloth had actually captured Minor's daughter. Seems to be an epidemic for House Redaran, having their children snatched away by the Telvanni. Naloth was apparently holding her somewhere in Tel Naga, so entering the Great Hall, I managed to find what I was looking for. Some unnamed female Dunmer was being held behind bars. I couldn't quite reach her though, as a wood elf named Galmir was blocking the entrance. While it might have been rash, I did what I had to do and cast Frenzy. Galmir whipped out his bow, but he was too slow to the draw. Before he could let off a single arrow, I struck him down. Stepping over his corpse, I approached the Dunmer and confirmed that it was Erebar's daughter. Nartis Erebar begged me to help her. If she escapes the tower and makes it to the docks, she can send word to Minor who will reward me for my actions. Honestly, the only reward I need is his support, so telling her to follow me, we began our grand exit. However, it wouldn't be so easy. The other Telvanni members in the hall turned their gaze towards us and aggroed on. They lit off powerful spells that had equally as dangerous radiuses. I did my best to cut them down as quickly as possible. By the skin of my teeth, I had barely survived. As I was getting ready to celebrate, I turned around and saw that Nartis Erebar had perished during the fight. The AoE of these spells must have affected her, and she likely died after the first blast. Well, thankfully this is a video game and I could just reload. Reverting back, I decided to do things a little more strategically. One by one, I cast Frenzy on each Telvanni member in the Great Hall. Once all 3 of the NPCs were dead, I spoke with Nartis and told her to follow me. From here, things were pretty straightforward. We ran across town and made it to the docks. The journal updated, and the grateful young Erebar told me to speak with her father. Returning to Aldrun and entering Minor's manor, the councilman's demeanor was completely different. He thanked me for rescuing his daughter and apologized profusely about our conversation from before. Minor gladly gave me his support as a counselor, and with it, a couple of other rewards. First was his amulet, and second was a Redaran Master Helm. According to Erebar, every counselor needs a master helm for rituals and public appearances. Erebar's amulet is an enchanted necklace that deals fire damage for 5 to 15 points for 5 seconds on target. It also provides the wearer with a fire shield for 50 to 100 points for another 5 seconds. As for the helmet, it appears to be a unique, unenchanted bone mold headpiece. It's medium armor, but as Erebar said, might be best to leave it for the ceremonies. With that, thus ends the quest. Minor Erebar support. With one down, that makes for just one more counselor to go. The next councilman on this list is Garissa Lethri, and shocker, he too has a manor in Scar. Entering the Lethri household and navigating its corridors, I finally landed at Garissa. Speaking with him, he got straight to the point. He knew that I was here for his support, and similar to Ramarin and Morvayn, he already picked out his task. Lethri wants the Caldera ebony mines shut down. The counselor believes that there's some level of corruption going on there. He can't quite put his finger on what it is, but he just has a hunch about it. House Hlaano are the ones who run the mine. Again, another shocker, and he'd like me to find some sort of evidence for their corruption. I love how Garissa is just sort of grasping at straws on this one. It feels like he's hating for the sake of being a hater. If the Hlaano or the Telvanni are involved, even in legal business, the goal is to bring them down at any costs. Well, I will say this, believe it or not, Lethri was onto something here. He had no business being right, but he was right. Landing at the Caldera mining camp, I had no idea where to go. Fun fact, this was my first time at this stretch, as I had never gone beyond the mines themselves. So this led me to entering the first building I had laid eyes on, Slave Shack 2. Turns out I was on the money with this one. The only NPC in the shack was a Khajiit named Delina. Speaking with her, the conversation was brief, but I Hail Married with any evidence of corruption. For obvious reasons, Delina wanted this place shut down just as badly as Garissa. The Khajiit informed me that someone named Odril Helvi has a chest in the Governor's Hall. This chest has a record book in it, and Delina believes that this book holds what Lethri seeks. I'd return the favor to her at a later date, but for now, I had to break off and carry out with the rest of the mission. While I learn more and more about this game every time I play it, I'm always surprised at the little bits of lore and detail that were unknown to me. I genuinely had no clue that the Caldera mines use slaves to get their ebony. Fortunately for them, if this all goes well, they'll be out of here in no time. Reaching the town of Caldera and entering the Governor's Hall, I ascended to the second floor. Running past this Odril Helvi himself, I located the aforementioned chest and unlocked it via spell. On the inside, there were a couple of history books, and buried at the bottom was the secret Caldera ledger, the whistleblow to whistleblow them all. Everyone here was none the wiser, and with a simple recall spell, I was back in Aldrun. Speaking with Garissa and telling him about the book, I handed it over. Lethri was pleased, as the book showed that House Hlaano was skimming from the top and taking some undocumented raw ebony for themselves. With the evidence in his hand, the councilman wants the mine shut down for good. With that, thus ends the quest, Evidence of Corruption. Resuming the conversation with Garissa, he doesn't have much more to add. His orders stay the same, I'm to shut down the mines for good. If House Hlaano complains to the Duke, the ledger becomes our golden ticket, as it shows proof of their corruption. As of right now, there isn't a whole lot of direction. I'm in charge of this tall task, yet I don't have any leads, advice, or valuable information. However, that would quickly come to change after chatting around with Caldera's locals. With low dispositions, everyone just questioned why I'd want to shut the mines down. However, after raising them up, the ideas started to flow a little more freely. The two main statements are that they'd have to shut down operations if the bosses suddenly weren't here anymore, and that Delina the slave is incredibly valuable to the whole system. So, there are 3 ways of going about closing the mines. Number 1 is to take out the heads of the operation. I already know of one, Odril Helvi. Helvi is on the 2nd floor of the Governor's Hall. Unfortunately, his dialogue isn't really important, and there's not much that can be done to persuade him, threaten him, or trick him. Really, the only option is to assassinate him. Casting Frenzy, the level 17 monk goes down pretty easily. As for his unknown associate, well, it's time to turn your attention towards the mining camp. There's always a silent partner, Odril, and then there's the loud partner. Stellenius Vabato takes care of the day-to-day operations at the mine itself. He can be found in the lower level of the company office. Similar to Helvi, there isn't really any quest-relevant dialogue. Casting Frenzy, the level 13 miner is even less of a challenge than Odril. Once he was defeated, my work in Caldera was done. Recalling to Aldrun and reporting to Garissa, he wasn't enthused with my methods. He acknowledges that the job got done, but calls attention to the political issues that will follow these assassinations. Fortunately, he still honors his word and names me councilman. While that's one way to wrap up the quest, there are two other pathways and both involve Delina. Reverting back, I made my way to the mining camp and entered Slave Shack 2. Chatting with the Khajiit and asking about shutting down the mines, she says that the slaves practically run the show here. If they were to be freed, the operations would come to a halt. In order to free Delina, I need to find the key. Now, as brutal as it sounds, there's more than one way to free her. Attacking Delina and cutting her down in the shack, she's technically no longer able to run the mines. With her death, the operations here come to a halt. Recalling to Aldrun, Garissa shows little remorse. He recognizes the power play of killing their most reliable slave and claims that it'll take House Hlaalo more than a month to recover. Furthermore, Lethri vows to support me as a council member and even gifts me a pair of ebony boots. This is way number 2 of completing the quest, but reverting back once more, the third and final option doesn't involve any bloodshed. The slaver's key that Delina was talking about is actually in the nearby guard tower. It's on a table, all the way at the top, by some candles, a sword, and a note. Taking it and returning to the Khajiit, I unlocked her slave's bracers and got the update. Delina said that she'd leave the mining camp when the moons were right, whatever that means. Sounding good enough to me, I recalled to Aldrun and turned in the quest for a third and final time. Lethri had roughly the same dialogue as the previous outcome. This time though, instead of acknowledging Delina's death, he acknowledged that I did good by freeing the head slave. As a reward, I still earned his supports and the pair of ebony boots. With that, thus ends the quest, Shut the Mines Down. With the support of 4 counselors, it's officially time to ask for a promotion. Again, hopefully I'm not in a catch-22 with the whole Stronghold progression thing. I can only advance in rank if I expand my base, but I can only expand if I advance in rank. Well, chatting with Sarethi, my fears were quickly washed away. Athen recognizes that I have the backing of every single council member, minus Bolven Venom. On top of that, my stronghold is in good shape, so Counselor Sarethi officially makes me an equal. As I advance to the rank of councilman, that actually opens up a couple of different quests. First and foremost is the completion of my stronghold. Secondly, it also allows me to close out the rest of Feral Rethoran's storyline. Then thirdly, there's one final task that comes from Sarethi, but in my opinion, it's the be-all, end-all for this questline, so I'm saving it for last. With all that being said though, I wanted my next order of business to be the stronghold. It's half complete, and having left it like that grinds my gears a bit. So, returning to Galsa at the council hall, I asked about my base, and she said that phase 3 of the build can begin soon. The only thing though is that she thinks the stronghold needs more settlers. Gindu suggests that I speak with Hetman Gulls at Baal Isra in order to see how that can be done. This part of the quest is actually pretty awkward, but sort of funny too, mostly in terms of how it's carried out. Reaching the stronghold, it looked like they made decent progress. While I went in to take a look at things, I'll wait until it's complete for the grand unveiling. On the outside though, there's now a wall which partially blocks the base from threats and the elements. There are also a handful of NPCs lingering around, making the place feel livelier. Locating the Hetman, I asked him about tracking down more settlers. Gulls replied by saying that they're happy here. However, he thinks that things would be better for everyone if there were more women around. No sausage fests at Baal Isra, you know? Since most of the men are single here, the Hetman thinks they'd benefit from having wives, certainly a step up from just having girls check the place out. Gulls suggests that I check around Aldrun for some single ladies. If the fish aren't biting, he suggests that I look into buying slaves from Tel Arin, citing that many would probably prefer a forced marriage over slavery. To me, it's picking the shiniest of two turds, but hey, I'm just trying to rise through the ranks here. Returning to Aldrun, I began harassing the woman there and asking if they were single. Fortunately, they didn't throw a warranted sucker punch and actually directed me to a few unspoken for Dunmer. The first of which was someone named Fathusa Garethi. She was at the Aldskar Inn, and let's just say she wasn't exactly jumping at the chance of forced marriage. It took some convincing, aka manipulation by illusion and some gold, but Fathusa finally gave in. With a disposition of 90, she reclarified what the plan was and called the stronghold Indaris Manor. which is honestly a pretty good name. After confirming that she got the absurd details right, she actually agreed to move there, so that was a victory in my books. The next lead on a single lady was Arini Orethi. I found her wandering around town and popped the same "need wives" question. Of course, she responded in a dumbfounded manner, asking if I thought she'd just marry anyone. So, using the same tactics as before, magic manipulation and cold hard cash, she agreed to at least give the manor a try. At this point, I felt like a weird club promoter. Girls get in free before 11 type of thing. The nice part though is that technically 2 ladies is all Ondres Manor needs, so my job was done. However, I was curious about the aforementioned slaves in Tel Arin, so heading to the Telvanni-based town, I was directed over to someone named Sevilla Main. I guess she was the proprietor of slaves, as she was wheeling and dealing them. When wives were brought up, she said that she didn't have any suitable bachelorettes at the moment. However, if I paid her now, she'd go and find 2 to send to the manor. 2 mail-order brides would end up costing me 2,000 drakes. From here, I finally understood the angle. If the player is proficient in speechcraft, illusion, or can bribe their way up, the Aldrune ladies are for you. However, if you're just a Nerevarine with a lot of cash and not a lot of personality, the slaves in Tel Arin might be your best bet. Either way, once at least 2 single girls have been sent to the Stronghold, Phase 3 of construction can officially begin. Recalling to the Stronghold and informing the Hetman, he says that he'll spread the word. Morale must be that low, eh? Returning to Underscar and seeking out Garissa, I tell her that Gulls is satisfied with the turnout. Gindu responds and says that with her word, the Stronghold will soon be completed. Like before, I turned to being the worst house guest imaginable and loitered in Gulsa's home for a couple of days. Once the journal update popped up, I was all set. Gindu said that my house was officially done, and that Ondres Manor rivals that of any Redoran counselor's home. Recalling to Bala Isra, aka Bard's Stronghold, it's time to take you on the tour. The exterior is lined with a tall and strong wall. Within the walls are a handful of NPCs, some guards, the Hetman, and some settlers. There are a concerning number of beasts and creatures in the area, but hey, that's what the guards are for, right? On the actual grounds themselves, there are 4 buildings. One of the smaller buildings is the Manor Services. Here, there are several NPCs who can sell me goods and repair items. Fothasa can even be found down here, and while she doesn't have a husband yet, she still doesn't hate being here, so that's a win in my books. Next, the tall tower is a guard tower. The actual lookout part doesn't get used much, which could be concerning. In any case, there's only 1 NPC in the interior, and he offers training in Longblade, Blunt, and Axe. The next building is yet another small one, and it's plated as Berendis' house. I don't know who Berendis is or why he's important enough to get his own house on my land. In any case, inside there are a few NPCs. A woman named Heniel, who could have been one of the Tel Arin slaves. Then there's Uvail Berendis, who offers goods, spells, and spellmaking. Useful services for sure, but not enough to warrant property on Ondres Manor. Then lastly, there's the Piece de Resistance, Ondres Manor itself. There's a quote-unquote reception area, if you will, that houses a lone trainer. There's a storage room, a tavern, a guest suite, so to speak, then finally the main bedroom, or at the very least, it's the one I'm claiming for myself. The Stronghold is honestly pretty awesome, and it feels whole and lively. The NPCs really add to the immersion, and there's a sense of comfort and security here. With the tour over, thus officially puts an end to the quest, Stronghold. At this point, there are only a handful of quests left for House Redoran. Some can be seen as pretty tough, while a select few are akin to the ones that were played through at the beginning. The easier ones are actually given out by a totally new NPC. At least she's totally new to me. What's more, you don't really interact with her, at all really, unless you seek her out on your own. The quest giver is a Dunmer named Tavesi Belith, and she owns a smithy in the council hall area of Underscar. Entering her shop, there were 3 NPCs, someone named Deval Belith, a guard, and of course Taveso. Speaking with her, she introduced herself as well as her son, Deval. Right away, I could see that she has duties as a dialogue prompt, so getting into it, I asked her for some work. Taveso said that Deval wanted to do the Ruddy Man pilgrimage. In case you forgot, that's the same one that Fedris Tharen got sick on. It's the Coal Cave, which is extremely close to Gnisis. Belith wants her son to go, but she would like someone to escort him as he's young and inexperienced. So, chatting with Deval, our conversation was quick and to the point. He wanted to know if I was here to escort him, and I said yes. From there, he wanted to be taken to Coal Cave right away. Truly, this quest is the simplest one I've embarked on in quite some time. Honestly, the hardest part is traveling from Scar to the Silt Strider. Duval is super slow and gets caught on every single NPC he runs past. Plus, if you have a high speed attribute, it's easy to leave him in the dust. For this one though, the change of pace is pretty nice. It's a mindless task and it was over in less than 5 minutes. Once Duval and I were inside of Cold Cave, the journal updated. The young Beleth thanked me for the escort and said that he'd traveled back to Aldrune with another pilgrim. Sounding good to me, I recalled to Scar and spoke with Teveso. As an expression of her gratitude, she gifted me a steel fire sword. Without trying to sound too obvious, the steel fire sword is a one-handed long blade that deals 3 to 7 points of fire damage per strike. With that, thus ends the quest, Escort to Cold Cave. Speaking with Teveso again, I asked her for some more work. The smith told me that some buoyant armiger owes her money. Teveso repaired Giris and Daram's armor, yet he refuses to compensate her. Beleth knows that since Giris' brothers are respected armigers, there's no redress or lawful action that can come from the counselors. So, Teveso wants me to go to Molag Mar and to get the 2,000 drakes out of him. She doesn't explicitly state how, but I'm assuming violence, threats, and theft are off the table. It's interesting that the buoyant armigers are held to such a high regard, even if they're breaking the law. I understand that they're these badass warriors who are defending the people of Vvardenfell. They're the people's defense against these scary ash creatures of Red Mountain. I also get that you have to be a highly skilled warrior to even be considered for this position. But for Teveso to not be able to report what's essentially theft because House Redoran respects the armigers too much is pretty crazy. If it was anyone else, say the Nerevarine, the guards would have seized them in moments. So today, I'm on the side of Morrowind's law. Reaching Molag Mar and exploring the compound, I had no idea where to find Daram. No one had him as a dialogue prompt, and the canton itself is pretty massive. I wandered aimlessly for a good bit, sticking my head into each room and bothering the rest of the armigers. Finally, I ended up locating Tidros and Daram, one of Giris' brothers. Speaking with him, I brought up the armor repair debts. Tidros was confused at first. He wasn't sure why I would talk about his brother's debts with him. This is where I told him that Giris has refused to pay them. Luckily, Tidros has some sense to him. He said that he'll talk with his brother, but in the meantime, I should just tell Giris that Tidros thinks it'd be the honorable thing to do. Looking around the room, I came across Birr, the third Indaran brother, and then finally I spotted Giris. Chatting with him, he was quick to the draw. His opener was him outright refusing to pay the debt. Bringing up what Tidros had said, Giris ended up changing his mind pretty quick and agreed to cough up the gold. However, there was one condition. Him and I had to duel. If I win, he gives me the 2,000 drakes. If he wins, well, I guess I just die? Accepting the challenge, Giris is level 12, dons chitin armor, and wields a fiend Tonto. Depending on your loadout, he shouldn't be too much of an issue. A couple of slashes with my Dai Katana, and he was down for the count. Once his health hits a certain threshold, he concedes and gives over the 2,000 septims. With the debt money in hand, I recalled to Aldrune and spoke with Teveso. Giving her the gold, she was thrilled to finally receive her compensation. As a reward, she gifts me a Glass Frost sword. This is a one-handed long blade, and it deals 3 to 7 points of frost damage per strike. With that, thus ends the quest, Armor Repair Debts. Chatting again with Teveso and asking for more work, the smith informed me that that's it for her. Her story arc in the Redoran questline was short and sweet. At this point, there are only 3 quests left. 2 that come from Feral Rethran, and 1 that comes from Athen Sarethi. Being hard blocked by Feral has been looming over my head for quite some time, so I figured might as well take care of her tasks first. If you recall, she needed someone of counselor status to deal with her jobs. That likely means that whatever those tasks are, I'm in for a treat. Reaching Vivek and seeking out Rethran, I asked her for some duties. The steward informs me that House Telvanni has constructed an illegal stronghold. It's called Tel Uvarith, and it's ran by a wizard named Rainal Uvarith. The stronghold was built on Uvarith's grave, which is located west of Telfur. My objective is to hit the Telvanni base and assassinate Rainal. Now, I actually discovered something about this quest and the next one, but I'll only really get into it once the next one has been started. Sorry to tease the teaser. However, if you've played through all 3 of the Great House storylines, you might know where I'm going with this one. In any case, Tel Uvarith is of course on the eastern side of Vvardenfell. From Sadrith Mora, it took me a little bit to levitate over. It's considered to be in the Molag Amor region of the island. Getting close to the location, I could see the massive Telvanni tower come into my field of view. Interestingly, there were a lot of Dwemer warbots in and around the area. I wasn't sure what to expect as I am in enemy territory, so I armed myself and charged in. To my relief, they didn't care about me being there. In fact, almost no one did. Tel Uvarith has various houses and nooks that other Telvanni wizards live in. While they weren't thrilled that a member of House Redoran was there, they weren't slinging around spells or calling me a swit. So, having some ease of access through the tower, I entered the lower region and began looking for Raynal. It didn't take long for me to encounter my first angry NPC. The wizard laid eyes on my character and instantly turned aggressive. As it would just so happen, this was Raynal Uvarith. She's a level 16 mage and quite obviously knows a whole slew of spells. Luckily for me, a couple of slashes and she was down for the count. At this point, I was worried that every NPC and warbot in Tel Uvarith was going to come for me. I readied myself, but backup never arrived. Again, no one really cared, which I found to be interesting. Regardless, my mission here was complete. The head of the illegal Telvanni stronghold was defeated. Recalling to Vivek, I reported my success to Retharan. All she really said was that House Redoran delivered a strong message to House Telvanni. I guess we did. They shouldn't let us wander freely around their bases. With that, thus ends the quest, Slay Raynal Uvarith. Chatting with Ferrell again, I asked her for some more work. This is where she tells me that, surprise surprise, House Hlaano is now working on an illegal compound. Who could have seen that one coming? Renasa Rethan is the lord of Rethan Manor. Rethan Manor is located on the Odai Plateau, just south of Balmora. Like the last quest, Ferrell would like me to storm the stronghold and assassinate Renasa. So here comes my big revelation that I teased in the last mission. It honestly isn't anything crazy, and I'm sure most of you have pieced it together by now. But should the Nerevarine had decided to join House Telvanni or Hlaano instead of Redoran, they would have been the owner of Rethan Manor or Tel Uvarith. I'm also wagering that there are other missions with the Great Houses to eliminate the leaders of the other compounds. Meaning, Raynal dies in 2 quests, and Renasa dies in 2 quests. If the Nerevarine wasn't a part of House Redoran, I'm sure some other schmo is the target, and that's who you would have to kill. I could easily look this up, but I don't want to spoil too much for myself. Furthermore, it's interesting to think that perhaps Raynal Uvarith and Renasa Rethan had the same journey that the player had. What I mean by that is that perhaps they embarked on all of the quests, duties, and tasks with their respective houses that the player would have otherwise done. They started their journey at the same time as the Nerevarine, rose through the ranks, and were tasked with building a stronghold. In some way, Renasa and Raynal are the player. I'm just kidding, I wouldn't go that far. But it is really interesting to think about their possible lore. The only thing though is that the ESP claims they aren't part of their respective houses. This is likely because their data doesn't place them under any sort of faction. Regardless, at Rethan Manor, the setting was pretty similar to Tel Uvarith. The only person who cared about my presence was Renasa Rethan. Rethan is actually placed at level 24, which is way higher than Raynal, and she's a Nightblade. She fights with magic, and I'm not gonna lie, she almost got me. Luckily, I was able to strike her down first, and that was the end of another lord's life. Interestingly, if you look around with a keen eye, you'll notice that there are a lot of similarities between Indaris Manor and Rethan Manor. Must have been the same foreman for the job. He's actually the final boss for this questline. Again, just kidding, but that would be kind of interesting. Recalling to Vivek and speaking with Ferrell, I reported my success. She just responded with another cold remark and called it good work. I almost wonder if I should be worried at Indaris Manor. With that, thus ends the quest, Slay Renasa Rethan. Leaving Vivek City, I made way for Aldrin. At this point, there's only one quest left in the storyline, and you'll soon see why I left it for last. If you played through Morrowind's main questline, you'll know exactly which mission it is. In fact, it's a small gripe I'm going to go over once the story comes to an end. Entering Scar and heading to Sarethi Manor, I sought out my fellow councilman and brought up advancement. This is where Athen tells me that there's no way to progress further through the house. The only position left is Archmaster, and if I want to become it, I need to defeat Bolvin Venom in a duel. Sarethi believes that Venom will never allow an Outlander to become Archmaster. While he's the best leader that House Redoran has seen in quite some time, he's not perfect. Bolvin has abused his power, he's committed crimes, and he's wronged the other councilors. Athen thinks I would make an even greater leader than Venom would, calling out the Nerevarine strength and ability for mercy. Well, with nothing left to do but to approach Venom, that's exactly what I did. Up until now, Bolvin hasn't really made an appearance. I think I could have sought him out during the Rescue Varvur Sarethi quest, but he wouldn't have added anything to the plot. The Archmaster is of course in his manor, more specifically the private quarters section. Interestingly, upon approaching him, he's one of the few NPCs that didn't snap their attention towards me. Even Master Naloth of House Sylvani acknowledged my presence, but for some reason, Bolvin Venom wanted nothing to do with me. He must really hate my guts. Well, speaking with him, we got into it right away. Venom only has one line of dialogue. He says that I'll never be the Archmaster. He calls for a duel in Vivek's arena. That's where he's going to prove that he's the house's superior warrior. That's literally it for the conversation. There's nothing more beyond that, and all I can do now is meet him at the arena. Before, I called attention to the fact that this quest is in the game's main storyline. Slight spoiler for that questline, but the player needs to defeat Venom in the arena as he outright denies your claim of becoming Hortator. So really this guy's life ends early all because he wants to be a contrarian. Now, I have to say, I love arena fights. If you use ranged attacks, you'll know exactly why the arena is such an unfair battleground. Entering its plaza area, or the arena pit, I'm brought to the spectator's position of the actual arena. However, Venom, who's currently down in the pit itself, aggro's on regardless. So, in classic Revenge of the Sith fashion, I have the high ground and can fire off endless range attacks at Bolvin. The Archmaster wields a sword, and it's like he brought a knife to a gunfight. There's literally nothing he could do. A couple of powerful, well-placed casts, and the Archmaster is dead. That's all it takes to win in the arena. Even if you're not a ranged character, some destruction-based scrolls will likely do the trick. Now, because I owe it to House Redoran to be the best warrior I can be, I reverted back and hopped into the pit with Bolvin. Credit where credit is due. Venom is one tough son of a gun. He's only level 20, but he dons a full set of ebony armor, minus the helm, and wields a Daedric Daikatana, exactly like my character. He's one of the few NPCs that didn't die in 3 or so hits, so he gets a Medal of Honor just for that. However, before long, Venom fell for a second time, and at this point, his death would be permanent. While Athens said some members of House Redoran consider it dishonorable to loot the dead, I say get your money's worth. If you need the gear upgrade, it's here for you. Otherwise, the Daikatana alone is worth 120,000 gold. I'm not sure who's paying top dollar for it, but someone will give you a pretty penny. With the fight all wrapped up, I recall to Underscar. It turns out that the last journal entry for House Redoran was when Bolvin died. From here, there's no grand ceremony, celebration, or some kind of coronation. Everyone just addresses me as Archmaster. I am officially now the leader of House Redoran, and all my tasks are done. With that, thus ends the quest, Duel with Bolvin Venom, and the questline as a whole has come to an end. Now, I wanted to close out this video with some of my thoughts. I did my best to convey my opinions and experiences during the questline itself, but consider these my closing remarks, if you will. For starters, shout out to all of the channel members who helped to pick this storyline. I let them decide which of the 3 houses to start with, and they did not disappoint. For the most part, I had a really positive experience playing through House Redoran's story. I thought Redoran had a really nice mix of diplomatic-based quests, i.e. speechcraft and disposition checks, as well as action-based quests, dungeon crawls, fetches, and bounty hunting. I love when storylines are able to balance the best of both worlds and can leave the player guessing as to what comes next. In fact, House Redoran had 36 quests. As far as I can tell, that's up there as one of the longest questlines. For perspective, the main questline only has 21. Granted, they're a lot more fleshed out and have side missions within them, but still, you get the picture. On the other hand, the Fighters Guild has over 30, and they're more akin to House Redoran, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. Regardless, like most of Morrowind's questlines, House Redoran doesn't really follow some overarching story. In later titles like Oblivion and Skyrim, most factions and questlines tend to have a looming threat or subject. However, House Redoran's story consists of loose tasks that didn't need much backstory or lore to complete. You kind of hop in, embark on a small adventure, and then close it out. Of course, there are pros and cons to both. There's an argument to be made that it's more authentic for a storyline to be filled with an assortment of standalone duties and tasks. It gives the player a more, shall we say, realistic perception of how rising through the ranks correlates to difficulty of quests. On the other hand, It's nice when the story complements itself. It feels good to know that your actions have consequences, both good and bad, on the game's universe. And it's satisfying to know that the NPCs can feel the magnitude of it as well. They convey their emotions and feelings towards the recent events, react in a certain way, and because of it, the story keeps evolving. Personally, I love when a questline can find a nice balance of the two. For example, Morrowind's main questline. It followed an overarching story and was extremely complex. It had events that were connected via the player's actions, and it also had standalone quests that were necessary in order for the player to progress. Unfortunately, while it was a fantastic experience, the story element of House Redoran didn't have as much synergy as I would have liked. On that subject, I actually felt like the questline should have done more with Bolvin Venom. I would have liked to have seen some aftermath with the Sarethi family. Venom was directly undermined by Athen and the player. Even though Bolvin was in the wrong, I wish the game would have shown us how hot-headed and retaliatory the Archmaster really gets. If anything, I think you get a better grasp of this during the main questline. It follows a lot of the same politics and tensions that we see amongst the counselors. Varvur gets rescued, the other council members take some time to come around, some favors get done, and before you know it, you're almost Hortator. The only one standing in your way is Bolvin. He outright refuses to let an Outlander be given that title, and after some back and forth, he demands a duel in order to put it all to rest. It's roughly the same outline of the House Redoran story, but I think the condensed timeline makes things a little more concise and passionate. The momentum doesn't get lost. With all of that being said though, I actually really enjoyed the questline. I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10. What's the criteria? I have no clue, but it's the rating I'd give it. I'd love to know your thoughts on House Redoran's storyline down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.